Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a very slow, very fuzzy stumble into the world of medieval alcohol. That's right, grab your tankard, because you're about to find out what getting absolutely wasted was like, before people even had pants with zippers. It's all fermented grains, leaky thatch roof taverns, and hangovers that might involve leeches. You probably won't survive this. No, seriously, between questionable hygiene, loose sanitation laws, and the fact that literally everyone is drinking ale all day because water might kill you, chances are slim. But you'll be fine, for now. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always curious where and when you're listening. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to a rooster that sounds like it's dying slowly and dramatically, but that's just how roosters are. You sit up in your straw mattress, push aside the wool blanket that's only a little damp from the dew and possibly something else you don't want to think about, and yawn. Your stomach growls, you're hungry, but more urgently, you're thirsty. Not for water, because no one drinks water. You might as well lick a puddle outside the tannery. Instead, you reach for the warm clay jug next to your sleeping mat and pour yourself a cup of ale. Yes, breakfast ale. It's slightly sour, a little flat, and tastes like someone whispered barley into a bowl of murky river water. But it's what's for breakfast, and your neighbours are doing the exact same thing. You sip. It's not great. But this isn't the fun kind of ale. This is small beer, a low-alcohol brew made from the leftover grains after a stronger batch is pulled. It's like the tea bag you've used 5 times, but with booze. Just enough alcohol to keep bacteria at bay, and just enough bitterness to remind you life is short and full of fleas. You need hydration. You also need to not die. So you drink. You wipe your mouth on your sleeve, which doubles as your napkin, and probably also your pillowcase. Outside your tiny timber-framed cottage, the village is already alive. A pig runs by screaming. A child screams louder. Someone's yelling about firewood. Just another blessed Tuesday in your 14th century English hamlet, and you're already tipsy. Here's the thing. People in the Middle Ages drank a shocking amount of alcohol. Like 8 pints a day wasn't unusual. But don't imagine a crowd of medieval frat bros doing keg stands in chainmail. Most of it was weak. Barely 1 to 2% ABV. Enough to keep you upright and hydrated without knocking you into the mud. Most of the time. It wasn't just peasants swigging from dawn to dusk either. Nobles, monks, city folks. Everyone drank. The only difference was what they drank. You? You're drinking ale made with whatever grains are lying around, probably oats. If you're lucky, a bit of honey was added. If you're unlucky, the brewer got creative and tossed in herbs like hemlock or poppy, because the flavour needed a kick. The historical record shows people genuinely believed this stuff was healthier than water, and to be fair, they weren't wrong. Urban wells were shallow and easily contaminated by sewage, dead animals, or worse, so ale was life, literally. But there's a fringe theory, mostly popular with YouTubers and bored Reddit historians, that medieval folks were permanently buzzed, like everyone just sort of stumbled through life in a collective mild inebriation. The drunk Middle Ages hypothesis, let's call it. It's not really supported by serious scholars, but it does explain some things, like why someone thought jousting was a good idea, or why they put pointy shoes on everything. Now here's the twist. This morning's ale doesn't actually get you drunk, not really. It's like sipping beer-flavoured water, but give it a few hours. Once the day's real drinking begins, all bets are off. You head outside, down the muddy path past a few pigs and a guy trying to fix a broken cartwheel with a rock. You see the tavern, just a cottage really, with a painted stick for a sign and a wobbly door. Inside it smells like boiled onions, smoke and wet wool, and people are already drinking. Because it's market day, which means the stronger ale is flowing, and you're about to find out the difference between hydration and liquid courage. You slide onto a bench. The innkeeper's daughter nods at you, grabs a dented tankard, and pulls you a mug from a barrel that smells vaguely fruity, like rotten apples and regret. You lift it. Cheers. It hits harder than breakfast ale, and the warmth spreads fast. Your cheeks flush, your hands tingle, and the world gets a little blurrier around the edges. Someone starts singing in the corner, off-key and full-throated. You don't know the words, but you hum along. You're drunk. It's not even noon. One guy at the table brags that he's had 10 already, and he's fine. This is Oswin. Oswin lies. There's a long-standing debate among historians about just how drunk people got in the medieval period on a daily basis. Some argue the weak nature of most ale kept everyone mostly sober. Others point to records of drunkards, public fines for intoxication, and drunken court testimonies that sound like someone tried to recite Hamlet backwards. So maybe it wasn't just light hydration. Maybe people were just delightfully buzzed most of the time. Someone throws a crust of bread at your head. Oswin's laughing. You don't even care. You lean back, the fire crackling near your feet, and wonder briefly if this is the highlight of your month. It probably is. Because this is medieval drinking. It starts at sunrise and goes until someone throws up in a boot. And this is just day one. You wake up under a table. The first thing you see is a pair of boots. One upright, the other sideways, leaking something. The second thing you see is Oswin, passed out next to you with his mouth open and a beat in his hand like it's a trophy. There's straw in your hair. There's also a spoon in your pocket. You don't remember acquiring either. The tavern is quiet now. Dim. Someone snoring behind the counter. You sit up too quickly and regret it immediately. Your head feels like it was used as a drum in a peasant parade. But congratulations. You have survived your first full tavern night. Barely. You stumble to your feet and push the warped wooden door open into the morning light. Your eyes burn. Somewhere a rooster screams again. Same one. Same tone. Possibly slightly more judgmental this time. Welcome to the daily rhythm of medieval life. Drink, regret, work, drink again. But here's the thing. You're not even at the good part yet. That little dive you woke up in? That's the local village alehouse. It serves the basics. Small ale, thicker ale, a slightly fermented cider that tastes like burnt pear and goat breath, and a selection of food you should never ask too many questions about. Today, though, you're headed into town. You want to know what the real drinkers are up to. The city has bigger taverns, real brewers, and some of the weirdest concoctions to ever pass for human beverages. So you hitch a ride on a hay cart, bouncing over rutted roads with a guy who says nothing except yep every few minutes, and eventually the low timber buildings of the village give way to the crowded streets of a medieval town. It smells awful. Like boiling fat and fish guts and a hint of lavender, if lavender were nervous and dying. You wander past vendors yelling about turnips, a barber surgeon advertising bloodletting, and a woman selling eel pies that look like they're already fighting back. Then you see it. A 3-story timber building with a hanging wooden sign carved into the shape of a barrel and a painted line that reads, "The Flaming Badger." It's already your favourite place. You duck inside and immediately feel the difference. This isn't your little village ale shack. This is a real tavern. There's a crowd. Traders, apprentices, travelling entertainers, a guy with way too many knives strapped to his belt. The air is thick with smoke, sweat, spilled ale, and something spicy that might be cinnamon but might also be powdered deer hoof. The tavern has barrels stacked behind the bar like a small fortress. The innkeeper, a squat man with one eyebrow and 0 neck, nods at you and pours something from a clay jug into a pewter cup. It's reddish, slightly frothy, and it smells like berries, vinegar, and disappointment. This is one of the stranger drinks you'll encounter tonight, a local brew called braggot. It's a mix of ale, honey, and sometimes wine or herbs, designed to make you feel fancy and wreck your liver at the same time. You sip. It's sweet, but sharp, like drinking syrup mixed with regret. In the corner, someone's playing a hurdy-gurdy. You think. It might be a cat fighting a bagpipe. You can't tell. Everyone's clapping, though, so maybe that's a good sign. You move from table to table, sampling more brews. One has wormwood in it and tastes like despair. Another's made with apples but has a kick that feels like it's doing math inside your brain. There's even something pink and bubbly that the server claims was imported from the southern lands. You drink it anyway. Bad choice. You end up sharing a bench with a Flemish merchant who swears by his grandmother's mead recipe. He pours you some. It's thick, golden, and hits like a cart full of bricks made of bees. You cough. He laughs. You cough again. The world tilts just a little more than usual. Here's a historical fact to keep in your wobbling head. Many of these drinks were brewed by people with no real training, and every batch could vary wildly. This meant two things. 1. Nothing tasted the same twice. And 2. Drinking could sometimes be a gamble with your health. Occasionally, seasoning your ale with herbs like henbane or mandrake, which are mildly to seriously toxic, was a thing. Supposedly for flavour, more likely to cover up the taste of mould. And get this, some recipes called for ingredients like soot, wood ash, or old bread with fungus. Fermentation was not a precise science in the 13th century. It was more like wizardry with a 40% chance of stomach cramps. You overhear a conversation at the next table, two apprentices arguing whether the beer in Ghent is better than the beer in York. One of them insists the yeast in Ghent smells more divine, while the other claims York's secret is using blessed barrels. This sparks a debate that draws in half the room, and soon you're watching grown men wave their cups in the air and shout about hops like it's politics. Which, fun fact, is kind of accurate. Hops didn't become widely accepted in England until much later. In the early days, beer was often flavoured with something called groot, a random blend of herbs that varied from town to town. When hops were introduced, some people hated the taste and thought it was a foreign, dangerous influence. A weird amount of beer xenophobia, honestly. You excuse yourself before someone throws a cup. You need air, and maybe something bland to settle your stomach. Outside, you sit on a stone step and lean back against the wall. A dog sniffs your boot, decides you're not edible, and trots away. The sun's down now. The moon glows silver through a layer of medieval smog. Your head buzzes. Your hands are sticky with ale foam. You think you might still be slightly drunk from yesterday, but you're learning something important. Medieval people didn't just drink to hydrate. They drank to live, to socialise, to celebrate, to dull pain, to escape boredom, to survive weddings and funerals and tax day. Alcohol wasn't just a beverage. It was the social glue, the emotional medicine, the Netflix and the aspirin of their world. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you're visiting a monastery. Because the monks? Oh, they take brewing very seriously, right? You wake up in a hay cart again. Different hay cart, same headache. The merchant from last night is gone, and so is your belt for some reason. But you're now bouncing gently along a dirt path lined with hedges and hedgehogs, and a questionable number of crows en route to a very different kind of drinking establishment. A monastery. Because as much as we picture monks as solemn, robe-wearing, bell-ringing, chant-humming scholars, a lot of them were also master brewers, and not just decent at it. They were the elite class of medieval beer nerds. So today you're off to visit the holy hopheads. The monastery comes into view like something out of a watercolour dream. High stone walls, ivy climbing the sides, a neat little chapel tower with a bell that rings exactly once as you arrive. Probably just to say, "Yes, we saw you. Please don't be annoying." A young novice greets you at the gate. His name is something like Brother Clemens, though he mumbles it, and you're not entirely convinced he didn't say clams. Either way, he leads you into the inner courtyard where monks in clean robes shuffle silently between duties, watering herb gardens, copying manuscripts, and most importantly, hauling barrels. Big barrels, heavy barrels, barrels that smell faintly of caramel and yeast and divine intervention. Brother Clemens explains that they follow the rule of St. Benedict, which encourages self-sufficiency. That includes growing their own food and brewing their own ale, which they do, with gusto. He gestures proudly toward a 2-story stone brew house that's somehow both humble and deeply intimidating, like it might judge your posture. Inside, the place hums, not just from the buzzing of bees outside or the low chants echoing faintly in the distance, but from the work being done. Huge copper kettles, stacks of grain sacks, wooden paddles, clay pots of herbs, and something boiling over in the corner that no one seems too concerned about. This is where the real magic happens. You're offered a sample, served in a modest wooden cup naturally. The ale is dark amber, smooth, rich, and significantly stronger than anything you've tasted so far. It tastes like roasted grain and old prayer books. You blink. There's an aftertaste of, is that clove? Yes. Yes it is. You're not imagining it. These monks aren't just brewing for hydration. This is craft beer. This is serious business. They use herbs like coriander and anise, sometimes imported from as far as the Holy Land. Some monasteries even had secret recipes, passed down like relics, and since monasteries had access to better ingredients and cleaner brewing environments, their beer was consistently some of the safest and tastiest you could get. In fact, here's your historical fact of the day. During the medieval period, some of the finest brewing innovations came from monastic communities. The concept of brewing as both a science and an art was pushed forward by these robed fermentation enthusiasts. They kept meticulous notes. They tracked temperature and timing. They built tools specifically for brewing. If you've ever enjoyed a Belgian Trappist ale, you're drinking a legacy that began right here in places like this. But of course, not all monks were pious professionals. There are plenty of whispered stories about monks sneaking extra sips, hiding bottles, or accidentally brewing more than their ration. There's even a fringe theory that certain monastic orders drank so much during Lent, when eating solid food was forbidden, that they unintentionally invented a sort of early beer cleanse. Nutritional beer, breakfast beer, liquid bread, you name it. You ask Brother Clemens if the monks ever get, well, tipsy. He blushes, looks down at his sandals and mutters something about moderation being a virtue. But he doesn't say no. He leads you down a narrow stairway to the cool, dark cellar where the barrels are stored. It's chilly and damp and smells like old wood and sweet malt. You're pretty sure you could nap here for 3 hours and no one would stop you. The shelves are lined with sealed clay jugs and labelled bottles, and one entire wall is devoted to storing herbs and spices. This is their vault, their treasure trove, the sacred fridge. Brother Clemens shows you a jug of something they only brew for feast days. You can't pronounce its name, but it translates to something like Heaven's Elbow. You ask what's in it. He says, mostly honey and strength. That's not helpful. You ask if you can try it. He hesitates, then nods once, solemnly, like he's just offered you a sip from the Holy Grail. It's thick, golden, and possibly alive. You take one mouthful and your whole chest warms up like you swallowed a lit candle. It's sweet, but with a deep, earthy backbone. You feel it in your bones. For a second you think you understand Latin, then you hiccup, loudly. Brother Clemens smiles. As you sit on a barrel and let the ale do its work, you realise just how central brewing is to this place. It's not just a side hustle. It's woven into the rhythm of monastic life. Brewing provides income for the abbey, sustenance for the brothers, and hospitality for pilgrims. It's quiet work, humble work, but also powerful. Beer that nourishes the body and, allegedly, lifts the spirit. Of course, not everyone approved. Outside the abbey walls, the church hierarchy sometimes looked down on the amount of alcohol consumed by clergy, especially when tales of drunken friars wandering into town started spreading. There's still debate among historians about how widespread clerical drinking was. Were most monks moderate and disciplined, or were some monasteries more like well-funded frat houses with incense? Either way, you're starting to see the pattern. No matter where you go in the medieval world, village, town or cloister, someone is brewing, someone is drinking, and someone, somewhere, is waking up confused in a hay cart. You finish your heavenly ale, thank Brother Clemens, and stagger gently into the sunlight. You squint at the sky. It's only mid-afternoon. Time means nothing now. You could sleep. You could drink again. You could join the monastery and never wear shoes again. But there's a feast happening in the next town over, and word is the wine flows freer than the sermons. So you hitch another ride. You smell the feast before you see it. Roast meat, fresh bread, melted butter, and something suspiciously fishy all blend into a warm, greasy fog that wafts down the road like a hungry ghost. You follow the scent through a stone archway, past a very bored guard picking his teeth with a dagger, and into the courtyard of a manor that looks like someone tried to build a castle, but got tired halfway through. Tonight you're not drinking with peasants or monks. Tonight you're a guest at a noble's table, and in the Middle Ages that means one thing: a full-on, no-holds-barred feast that lasts until someone either passes out or climbs into a barrel for fun. The hall is massive, the air thick with wood smoke and perfume, and the low hum of drunk conversation. Long wooden tables stretch down the room like a highway of meat and spilled wine. At the far end sits your host, Lord something or other, wearing a hat that looks more expensive than your entire village. He raises a jewelled goblet the size of a toddler's skull and shouts something about loyalty, God, or possibly cheese. It's hard to tell over the lute music, and then the drinking begins. Your goblet is filled with red wine that tastes surprisingly strong, fruity up front, then a bit like dust and regret. You try to sip slowly, but that's not how this works. Nobles don't drink to relax, they drink to perform. This is a show, a competition, a test of status and stamina. You're expected to keep up. A servant brings a tray of food. You think it's bread, until you realise it's bread stuffed with meat, stuffed with more meat. Next to it is a pie so glossy it reflects torchlight like a mirror. You poke it with a fork. Something inside hisses. You move on. You lift your goblet again. It's full. Again. No one asked. No one watched. It just refilled, like it's enchanted or cursed. You drink. It's wine, or something trying its best to be wine. There's a weird note of vinegar and cloves. Why cloves? Why are they obsessed with cloves? A scholar seated beside you explains that spiced wine is all the rage right now. It's called Hippocras, and it's red wine infused with sugar, cinnamon, ginger, and yes, cloves. It's supposed to be medicinal, also fashionable, also a way to mask the taste of wine that went a little off during transport. You smile and nod like you understand, then you burp. Here's your history fact for the evening. Nobles in the Middle Ages didn't just drink wine, they turned it into an art form. Imported wines from France, Italy and Spain were a mark of status. The older the better, the weirder the better. Some wines were aged in pitch-lined barrels, some were filtered through herbs, some were boiled with honey until they were more syrup than drink. The line between wine and experimental alchemy was very thin, and of course the poor didn't drink this stuff, too expensive. Wine was for the elite. If peasants had any, it was local, sour, and probably came with a free toothache. You try to stand, you wobble, you sit back down. A servant with an unsettlingly blank expression sets down a bowl in front of you. It's filled with tiny birds, whole birds, roasted, staring. You look at the man next to you. He bites one in half. Bones crunch. He grins. You push the bowl away and sip more wine instead. By now, the music has shifted from polite lute plucking to a full-blown string performance that somehow sounds both impressive and like someone dropped a harp down the stairs. The nobleman at the head of the table slams his goblet down and shouts something in Latin. Everyone laughs. You laugh too, even though you understood none of it. One lady passes you a goblet of white wine. It smells like pears and mischief. You drink it, instantly regret it. It's verjuice. Young wine made from unripe grapes. Tart doesn't even begin to cover it. It's like your mouth got into a fight with a lemon and lost. Somewhere in the haze a toast is made. Several, actually. One to the king, one to the queen, one to St. Hubert, the patron saint of hunters, one to the pig that was eaten last Tuesday. You raise your goblet every time. You're starting to sweat. A jester stumbles in, wearing bells, obviously, and starts juggling knives while singing something filthy in Old French. A dog chases him out. No one seems surprised. And then, the main course, a whole roasted boar. Its mouth is stuffed with an apple. Its eyes are unsettlingly lifelike. The smell is divine. You get a chunk of meat on bread and thank the heavens, only to realise the bread is rock hard because it's a trencher, an edible plate. You chew anyway. Bad idea. You're full. You're drunk. You're deeply confused by a man across the table who just poured his wine into a hollowed-out fruit and called it inspired. You try to stand again. Your legs disagree, so you sit, nod sagely at no one, and stare at the flames dancing in the hearth. Here's a fun fringe fact. Some nobles hosted themed feasts, including drink-themed games. One document describes a wine tree centerpiece with goblets hanging from its branches, each containing a different wine. Guests would pluck them at random and try to guess the vintage. Losers had to drink something called bitter milk, which probably explains the look of fear on their faces. Of course, not everyone was pleased with these antics. Some chroniclers, usually monks, complained bitterly about the gluttony and excess of noble tables. They wrote with disdain about the overuse of spices, the waste of food, and the sheer volume of wine consumed in a single evening. Were they exaggerating? Maybe. Were they secretly jealous? Probably. Because if you're being honest, part of you is definitely jealous. This is chaos. This is indulgence. This is excess at its medieval finest. And you are drunker than you've ever been. The fire is warm. The wine is endless. A nobleman just tried to recite poetry and accidentally insulted someone's mother. No one noticed. Or they did, and they laughed harder. It's impossible to tell. You close your eyes, just for a moment, and when you open them, you're under the table again, with a fork in your shoe, and someone singing a drinking song in the next room about a fish that became a bishop. You survived, again, somehow. Tomorrow, though? Tomorrow you'll be singing too. You don't wake up so much as re-emerge like a very tired mole tunnelling into the light. Your head throbs. Your mouth tastes like wine-soaked meat and regret. Your tunic smells like it tried to fight a candle and lost. But the fire is still crackling somewhere, and there's the soft sound of singing. You lift your head off the floor. Or maybe it's a bench. Hard to tell. The great hall is dim now, lit only by embers and a few half-melted candles. Most of the guests have stumbled off or collapsed where they stood, draped over furniture like noble laundry. But in the far corner by the hearth, a small group is very much awake and very much still drinking. They're singing, loudly, off-key, passionately, and every single one of them is deeply, hilariously drunk. You crawl over like a moth to flame, or more accurately like a worm to ale, and someone throws an arm around your shoulder before you even sit down. Another voice, he shouts, sing or drink, or both. You choose drink, naturally. A cup is thrust into your hands. You sip. It's warm, thin ale with something spicy in it. Possibly ginger, possibly a mistake. Either way, it burns. You blink away the sting and tune in to the next verse. Oh, the goose in the morning, he honks like a knight, and he pecks at your breeches if you're not polite. There's clapping. Someone slaps the table. A lute appears from the shadows, possibly summoned by dark magic or just bad luck. It's missing 2 strings and looks like it's been stepped on. A man with red cheeks and zero shame begins to play it anyway, strumming violently and shouting more than singing. And you're in. Because this is what passes for nightlife in medieval times. Improvised tavern concerts and drunken poetry slams. And it's kind of incredible. You join in the next chorus, the words slurred and half-guessed, your voice blending into a chaotic choir of peasants, merchants, and maybe one low-ranking knight who's forgotten he's wearing chainmail. Here's your historical fact of the night. Medieval drinking songs were everywhere. From royal feasts to dingy alehouses, people sang. It was part entertainment, part social bonding, and part tradition. The lyrics could be bawdy, spiritual, or completely absurd. Some were in Latin, some in Middle English, some in whatever language someone made up on the spot. The point wasn't accuracy, it was enthusiasm. One famous genre was the carol, a round dance song where everyone formed a circle, held hands and shuffled awkwardly while singing in unison. You're spared that particular humiliation tonight, though you do witness something that might qualify as dancing. A man attempting a jig while holding 2 tankards and falling over both of them. You laugh, loudly, probably too loudly, but no one notices, because now the man with the lute is trying to lead a round about a drunk friar who kissed a cow and married a barrel. You have no idea what the story is, but it rhymes, so you sing along. Then come the toasts. One man stands, barely, and raises his mug. "To the king!" Everyone cheers. Another toast. "To St. Arnold, protector of beer!" Cheers again. A woman chimes in with a slurred but heartfelt, "To the chicken who laid the egg I didn't eat this morning!" Massive cheer. You raise your own mug. You don't even know what you're toasting, but it doesn't matter. This is ritual, tradition, chaos in perfect harmony. And the more everyone drinks, the more beautiful the singing becomes, in the minds of the singers anyway. But of course, no good drinking session is complete without a weird fact, and tonight's is this. One 12th century manuscript contains lyrics to a song that translates roughly as, "In the tavern I shall die, in the tavern let me lie, wine inside me, angels near me, tell the brewer not to cry." It's the medieval equivalent of a country song mixed with a Yelp review and a eulogy. You sing it now, or something like it. Then someone tries to play the hurdy-gurdy. It starts well enough. A low droning hum that sounds like the inside of a wine barrel, but then a string snaps, the crank gets stuck, and the instrument emits a horrible demonic screech like a goose being exorcised. Everyone bursts into laughter, even the hurdy-gurdy player who shrugs and says, "It always does that on the sad parts." Now here comes the scholarly debate. How accurate are our assumptions about medieval pub music? Did everyone really break into song like a choir of inebriated hobbits? Or are modern reconstructions just romanticising the past? Some historians argue that singing was more common in specific settings, festivals, weddings, big feast days, while others insist it was an everyday affair. Either way, you're experiencing something real tonight. Music born of wine and camaraderie, imperfect but deeply human. You lose track of time. The songs blur together. The fire pops and crackles like it's clapping for you. Someone falls asleep mid-verse. Another person invents an entirely new song about a goat who runs a tavern. You promise to remember it forever and immediately forget the second verse. Eventually your own voice gives out, just a raspy whisper trying to stay afloat in a sea of merriment. Your eyes sting, your back aches, but your heart, it's full. This night, for all its smoke and mess, feels strangely perfect. You slump back against the wall, cup in hand, smiling as the final song winds down. A lullaby, soft and slow, sung by the oldest man in the room. His voice is cracked and weary, but the melody is beautiful, simple and ancient, like something passed down by firelight 100 winters ago. And as the notes drift upward into the beams of the great hall, you finally let your eyes close, not from drink, not from exhaustion, but because sometimes the best part of the night is knowing it has nowhere left to go but quiet. You awaken to the gentle sound of a chicken screaming directly into your soul. It's not actually screaming, of course, it's just clucking near your head, but when your brain feels like it's being scraped with a rusty ladle, even the softest sounds come with spikes. You peel open one eye. The great hall is empty now. The fire's out. A few overturned goblets litter the floor like metallic regrets. Someone drew a crude face on the wall in wine, and you're not sure if it's meant to be a portrait or a warning. Everything hurts. Your tongue feels like it's been sun-dried. Your temples throb in rhythm with your heartbeat, which is now clearly audible in your ears, your neck, and weirdly, your toes. Welcome to the medieval hangover. You stumble upright, or at least something similar to upright. Your clothes are wrinkled, stained, and faintly sticky. You smell like firewood and bad decisions. There is no coffee, there is no ibuprofen, there is only suffering. But fear not, because just outside the manor a healer is peddling hangover cures, and you are desperate enough to try anything. You shuffle outside into the blinding morning light and find a woman with an apron full of herbs and a face that says she's seen things. She takes one look at you and nods, knowingly. "Too much hippocraze," she says. "You don't even have the strength to deny it." She opens a pouch and pulls out what looks like pickled eel. "Here," she says, handing it over. "You chew that and then you sniff this." She holds out a little cloth bundle that smells like vinegar and regret. "Then we'll wrap your head with cabbage leaves. You consider death instead, but you chew. The eel is slippery, fishy, and oddly minty. Your mouth stages a protest. The vinegar bundle burns your nose like a warning from nature itself. The cabbage leaves are cold and damp, pressed around your head like a wet crown. You look ridiculous. You feel ridiculous. But after a few minutes, the pain softens. A little. Here's your historical fact. Medieval hangover cures were creative, to put it mildly. They range from the bizarre, like rubbing crushed raw owl eggs on your head, to the kind of horrifying, only desperate people would try, like stewed sheep lungs, or consuming the ashes of burned bread mixed with wine. Cures varied by region, and most of them likely did nothing at all except distract you from your hangover by introducing new problems. The eel thing, that one's real too. Salted or pickled fish was a common recovery food in the Middle Ages. Not because it worked, but because it was available, and people assumed if it was unpleasant going down it must be helpful. Sound logic. You sit down on a stone bench, cabbage slipping slightly over one eye, and try to remember the night before. It comes back in fragments, singing, shouting, toasts, dancing, and at some point an argument about whether goats can be knights. You remember losing that argument, passionately, and now the sun is climbing. The manor is stirring, people are emerging slowly, blinking into the daylight like confused moles. One man still has a turkey leg in his hand, another is missing a shoe. No one looks okay, but everyone looks satisfied, in a way, as if last night was worth the aftermath. Maybe this is what medieval life teaches you. When the nights are wild and the mornings are brutal, you just make peace with the pain. You watch as a servant offers cups of warm beer to the other guests. Not ale, beer, slightly thicker, with more grainy sediment. It's room temperature, flat, and smells faintly of hay. But apparently it's another cure. You try it, it doesn't help, but it also doesn't make it worse. So, progress. There's a scholarly debate you'd probably appreciate more if your brain weren't leaking out your ears. It's about whether medieval people even had hangovers the way we understand them. Some historians suggest that because most drinks were low in alcohol and spread out over long meals, the effects weren't as brutal. Others argue that, yes, they were just as miserable as we are, and some may have lived in a semi-permanent state of dull suffering, especially those with daily access to stronger stuff. Your current theory is, yes, they absolutely had hangovers, and they deserved them, just like you. Someone tries to hand you a boiled onion stuffed with spices and raisins. They claim it's restorative. You decline politely, which means you run away slowly while making dry heaving noises. Eventually you find a shallow stream and kneel by it. The water is cold, probably full of bacteria, but right now it's the only thing keeping you from melting. You splash your face. The cabbage crown falls in. You let it go. Back at the manor, someone starts singing again, softly, weakly. It's the same song from last night. You smile. Sort of. The pain's still there, but it's manageable now. You sit in the sun, damp and exhausted, and wonder how anyone lives like this every week. And yet, they do. Because here's the truth about medieval drinking. It wasn't about getting wrecked. Okay, not only about that. It was about bonding. It was about culture, storytelling, escaping, connecting. It was how people survived bad food, hard work, cold winters, and constant uncertainty. And if that meant waking up in a cabbage head wrap with a pickled eel aftertaste, so be it. You lean back on the bench, eyes half closed, and accept your fate. Tomorrow you swear you'll take it easy. One drink, maybe two. No singing, no goat debates, definitely no eel. But tonight? Well, There's a midsummer fair just a few miles down the road, and you hear they've got a drink that glows. The fair is tomorrow. That's what you keep telling yourself. Today is for recovery, for silence, for sitting under a tree and reflecting on your life choices while occasionally muttering, never again. But then you smell bread baking, fresh bread. And is that? Yes. Ale. Yeasty, warm, malty. It's like a siren song for your bruised, hungover soul. You follow your nose through winding village lanes until you find the source, a crooked little cottage with a thatched roof, smoke curling from the chimney, and a large wooden sign hanging out front. It's not shaped like a barrel, not even close. It's a painted picture of a woman holding a ladle, grinning like she knows exactly how bad your headache is. Inside, the room is warm and busy. It's not a tavern, not exactly. It's part home, part bakehouse, part brewery. Loaves of bread cool on a wooden table. Clay jugs of ale line a shelf near the hearth, and at the centre of it all stands the woman from the sign. She's not what you expected. She's taller than you, arms dusted in flour, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back in a scarf that's seen better days. She moves with a rhythm, measured, efficient, confident. And she gives you one look before saying, "If you're here to drink, get a cup. If you're here to wine, get out." You get a cup. She fills it from a cask near the hearth. The ale is dark, slightly cloudy, and smells like toasted oats and herbs. You take a sip. It's smooth, surprisingly strong, with a faint bitterness that creeps in after the second swallow. This is no small beer. This is the real deal. "Brew day," she says, motioning to a bubbling copper kettle in the corner. "Try not to fall in." This, as it turns out, is an alewife, one of thousands across medieval Europe, brewing and selling beer from their homes long before commercial breweries became a thing. And yes, they were mostly women. Brewing wasn't just women's work. It was a women's business. You're standing in a literal microbrewery, run by someone who could outdrink you, outbake you, and probably outwrestle you if it came down to it. Here's your historical fact. In many parts of the medieval world, brewing was a domestic trade dominated by women. They were the backbone of local beer supply, especially in towns and villages where large-scale breweries didn't exist yet. Alewives made small batches, often daily, and sold directly from their homes or at markets. The job required knowledge, precision, and stamina. It was respected, and it turned a decent profit, that is, until it didn't. As you sit quietly sipping your ale, the alewife, her name's Maud by the way, talks while she works, about grain prices, about water quality, about the merchant who tried to short her on hops last month, and now mysteriously has a limp. You nod, mostly to keep your head from sliding off your neck. Then she says something that catches you off guard. "Used to be, we had half the town coming through here. Now it's harder. Men are trying to muscle in, calling themselves guild brewers. Ha! I was brewing when they were still wetting the floor." This is where it gets complicated, because as beer became more profitable, especially with the rise of stronger hopped beer that could travel further, men started taking over. Brewers' guilds formed, regulations tightened. Suddenly women who'd been brewing for generations were pushed out or had to fight for licenses they used to earn by simply existing and not poisoning anyone. There's even a fringe theory, hotly debated but persistent, that the imagery surrounding alewives contributed to early witch stereotypes. Think about it. A woman brewing potions in a cauldron, wearing a tall hat, which may have been used to stand out in markets, keeping cats, which chased mice from the grain, and handing out strange liquids to strangers. Sound familiar? You ask Maud if she's heard the rumours. She grins. "Only thing I've ever hexed is a batch of bad barley." You help her carry a few jugs outside. People are already showing up casually, like they're not definitely here for the ale. A neighbour buys a jug for supper, then another, just in case. A baker trades a tray of still warm rolls for 2 mugs and a smile. The local reeve passes by, says nothing, and walks away with a full tankard. This isn't just a business, it's a network, a tiny, flower-dusted empire. You sit near the door, watching the rhythm of the day, the way Maud moves between kettles and customers, laughing, scolding, pouring, tasting. She tells stories between batches, about the time a drunk tried to propose to her and threw up in the bread bin, about the festival where her beer won a ribbon and the mayor got so drunk he knighted a chicken, about the girl who came to learn to brew and ended up running her own shop 2 towns over. You realise something slowly. This is more than just ale. It's community. It's survival. In a world where women had limited power, limited choices, brewing offered a rare kind of independence. And women like Maud, they earned every ounce of it. As the sun starts to lower, she hands you another cup. It's lighter this time, almost golden with a citrusy note. New recipe, she says. Don't tell the monks. You sip. It's good. Too good. You should probably leave now before this turns into another firelit sing-along and you wake up under someone's chicken coop. But before you go, Maud pats your shoulder. Come back after the fair, she says. I'll have something stronger. You nod. You will. Because tonight you've seen a different side of the drinking world. Not the rowdy tavern or the solemn monastery, but the kitchen hearth, the hands of women, the quiet mastery behind every pint. And if the next few centuries hadn't shoved alewives out of their own industry, maybe the history books would be full of names like Maud, instead of just a list of male guild members who brewed half as well and charged twice as much. You step back into the street, the last glow of daylight on your face, the warmth of ale in your chest, and the smell of boiling barley clinging to your hair. You're not drunk, not yet, but you're definitely back on the path, and there's a fair to find. You get to the fair just after sunrise, and already the place smells like mud, meat, and manure. Welcome to medieval festivities. Bunting flaps overhead, goats wander freely, and someone's already shouting about miracle beans that definitely aren't beans. You've had a piece of cold bread for breakfast and a half-hearted prayer that you won't fall into a ditch today. But before you can explore the glowing drinks you heard about, you notice something odd. Everyone here is drinking. Already. Not feasting, not relaxing, working and drinking. There's a group of men hammering together a wooden stage near the central square. One of them pauses to chug a mug of ale, and then immediately goes back to swinging a mallet like nothing happened. Across the way, a blacksmith is shoeing a horse while casually sipping from a flask. Even the guy yelling about his miracle beans is slightly slurring every third word. You blink at the sight of a guy carrying 2 crates of fish on his back and a cup in his mouth. He stops only to spit ale onto the ground, then keeps going. It's not a celebration. This is just normal. Everyone's just casually drunk on the job. You don't want to miss out, of course. A vendor waves you over and sells you something she calls mid-morning malt. It's warm, light brown, and slightly sweet, somewhere between a watery stout and a barley smoothie. You thank her, take a few sips, and start walking through the fair with what's technically your 3rd drink of the day. It's not even 8 in the morning. Here's the kicker. This wasn't unusual at all in the Middle Ages. Ale and beer weren't just drinks. They were daily fuel. For labourers, artisans, builders, cooks, farmers, servants, everyone. Water, as always, was suspicious and often unsafe. Milk went bad quickly. Juice was non-existent. Ale? You could count on that. And in many households and work sites, it was available all day, every day. Here's your historical fact for the morning. Records from medieval construction projects, including cathedrals and castles, show that workers were routinely given ale as part of their daily wages. It was literally built into their contracts. A full day's work could include anywhere from 2 to 4 gallons of ale, depending on the labour. Yes, gallons. They drank it before work, during breaks, and at the end of the day. The weak stuff during heavy labour, the stronger stuff to unwind. Occupational hydration. And yes, that means most people doing dangerous, physically demanding jobs were mildly buzzed all the time. You take a big gulp of your malt trying to imagine building a cathedral in this state. You nearly trip over a cabbage. You wander past a group of masons working on a low wall near the chapel. They're red-faced, laughing and clinking mugs together as they lay stone. One of them sees you and waves you over. "You any good with a chisel?" he asks. You're not. But that doesn't stop him from handing you one and pointing at a block of limestone. "Give it a go. Don't hit your hand, or do. Depends what kind of story you want later." You take the chisel, position it the way you think you've seen people do it in illustrations, and tap. A little chip comes off. The masons cheer like you've just built a tower. You're instantly promoted to honorary stonemason. This mostly means someone gives you another drink. This one's darker and more bitter, probably brewed with wild herbs or the tears of a disappointed brewer. You drink it anyway. It's not great. You are, however, drunk. A young woman sitting nearby is weaving baskets and humming to herself. Every few minutes she pauses, takes a sip from her cup, and keeps weaving. You ask her what she's drinking. She squints into her cup and shrugs. "Whatever they gave me," she says. "Tastes like old apples and wet hay." "So cider, probably." She offers you a sip. It does taste like old apples and wet hay, but it has a kick that makes your nose tingle. You hand it back and compliment her baskets. She thanks you, then mutters something about her fingers being numb but her spirits being perfectly pickled, which sums up the entire crowd, really. There's a fringe theory, sometimes whispered in pub history books and sometimes just made up by very tired historians, that the reason some medieval construction projects took so long was because everyone was working drunk. Not falling down drunk, but just off, slightly wobbly, creative in the worst way. Is it true? Probably not entirely. These people were used to it. Their tolerance was sky high, and most of the ale they drank was weak. But still, when you look at the leaning tower someone built over there and the very creative carving of what might be a lion or might be a cow with a sword, you start to wonder. You spend the next few hours helping and not helping various vendors. You carry firewood for a baker and accidentally drop half of it. She pats your head and gives you a scone. You sweep sawdust out of a puppet tent. You hold a goat for someone who insists it's therapy. The goat disagrees. Each time you pause, someone hands you a drink, small beer, cider, honey ale, berry wine. You stop asking what it is. You stop asking if it's morning. The atmosphere is cheerful, if slightly chaotic. It's a working fair, after all, not just a party. People are selling, building, performing and hustling. But they're doing it all with a steady buzz and a grin on their face. And honestly, it works. Well, mostly. You do witness one man try to rehang a sign by climbing a wobbly ladder with a tankard in one hand and a hammer in the other. The ladder wobbles. The man wobbles. He makes it halfway before sitting down on the top rung and declaring, "It's fine, it's fine." A small crowd claps. Here's the scholarly debate of the day. Was medieval productivity actually hindered by all this daytime drinking? Or did people simply build their lives around it, balancing mild intoxication with muscle memory and very low expectations? Some argue that since most ale was so weak, it didn't really impair anyone. Others insist the whole culture functioned on a foundation of collective inebriation. You don't have an answer. What you do have is another mug. The sun starts to dip low, casting everything in a soft golden light. The fair hums around you. Laughter, clinking cups, the clatter of hooves, the sizzle of something frying in fat. Your head is light, your steps uneven, but your heart is weirdly content. You've been a monk's guest, a noble's clown, a tavern floor mat, and now, somehow, a sort of stonemason who's helped raise a tent and held a therapy goat. You're not sure what you're becoming, but you do know one thing. If you're going to be drunk, it might as well be while helping build something, especially if there's a scone involved. The fair is beginning to slow down. The air smells like trampled grass, smoked meat, and the sticky bottom of an ale barrel. A fiddler plays something vaguely cheerful near a fire pit, and children chase a very tired goose in circles. You're sitting on a rough wooden bench with what might be your 7th drink in hand, although time and numbers have lost meaning. You've started to think you might just fade gently into the evening, slowly drinking your way into a peaceful stupor. But then you hear shouting. 2 men, red-faced and brimming with drunken confidence, are circling each other near the blacksmith's stall, and they look very much like they've decided to express their opinions with fists. You sigh and set your mug down. You're definitely not sober enough for this, and judging by the crowd gathering, neither is anyone else. It starts with a shove, probably over something deeply important like who had the better goat, or possibly the last meat pie. Then there's a punch, which misses entirely and hits a third man, who also happens to be holding a meat pie. The meat pie goes flying. A dog catches it mid-air. The crowd gasps. The brawl is officially on. Welcome to the medieval tavern-adjacent fairground brawl. You scoot a little closer. Not to fight, of course, to observe. With a seasoned ale drinker's eye. The two original combatants are now tangled together, swinging wildly and occasionally stopping to shout insults that mostly involve each other's mothers and questionable brewing skills. Someone's yelling, "Get him!" while another person is laughing so hard they fall into a turnip cart. And right in the middle of it all, a man wearing a crooked hat is yelling, "This is a legal matter," which is a sure sign that it absolutely is not. Here's your historical fact for the evening. Public drunkenness and fighting were extremely common in medieval towns and villages, especially around markets, fairs, and alehouses. And while there were laws against both, enforcement was, let's say, flexible. Unless serious injury occurred or property was damaged, most authorities treated drunken brawls like bad weather, unfortunate, messy, and ultimately inevitable. Sometimes, if things got out of hand, the town reeve or a constable would step in, but most of the time, fights burned out on their own. A few bruises, a ripped tunic, maybe a bleeding nose, and then everyone either laughed it off or remembered it bitterly for the next decade. This fight, though, has taken a dramatic turn. One of the combatants has somehow lost his pants. You're not sure how, you're not sure when. But there he is, stumbling, shouting, and wildly unbothered by the fact that he's suddenly representing his family line in his linen underthings. The crowd cheers. The other man, emboldened by the pants situation, grabs a nearby bucket and dumps it over his rival's head. It's unclear what was in the bucket. It might have been water. It might have been ale. It might have been eels. The pantsless man retaliates by grabbing the first object he can find, which is unfortunately a chicken. The chicken, very much alive and very much unhappy, flaps its wings in all directions and contributes nothing helpful to the situation. Someone shouts, "Tavern rules!" and throws their mug into the air. That seems to be the final straw. A small man with a big voice and a badge that might be made of tin steps into the circle and blows a whistle. Everyone freezes except the chicken. The chicken is on its own journey now. "This is now a matter for the court," the small man shouts, pointing a stick, possibly a scepter, possibly just a broom handle, at the brawlers. "You'll answer to the law." There's a groan from the crowd, not because anyone is worried, but because they know what's coming. The medieval version of courtroom drama, which is part punishment, part performance, and entirely drunk. A makeshift court is set up near the stocks. The two combatants are forced to sit on overturned crates. A local elder, who smells like wine and looks like he's been awake since 1304, declares himself judge and demands a rooster as bail payment. One is produced. Possibly the same chicken. Who knows anymore? You watch, thoroughly entertained as each man presents his case. One slurs through a passionate story about stolen boots and dishonour. The other claims he was merely blessed by ale and the Lord, which is somehow both nonsense and persuasive. There's laughter. There's debate. There is, astonishingly, an appearance by someone pretending to be a pig who witnessed the entire event and is now squealing in what might be testimony. Here's your quirky fringe fact. Medieval courts, especially in small villages, weren't always about justice as we think of it. They were often theatrical, communal, and extremely informal. Juries were made up of neighbours. Evidence was questionable. Some courts even allowed animals to be tried for crimes which, while rare, did happen. Pigs, in particular, were frequent defendants. Why pigs? Because they kept wandering into towns, eating things they shouldn't, and occasionally trampling someone important. Your scholarly debate of the night? Some historians argue that these brawls and their over-the-top court cases helped keep communities close-knit. They were a pressure release, a public spectacle that allowed grievances to be aired, laughed at, and hopefully resolved without further escalation. Others think it was just chaos with occasional side quests. Back at the fairground, the judge bangs a ladle on the crate and declares the case closed. The verdict: both men are guilty of being daft, drunk, and disappointingly slow. Sentence: they must share a bucket of ale, shake hands, and clean the chicken. The crowd roars with approval. You raise your mug and toast to justice, medieval style. The sun dips lower now, casting long shadows across the fair. People drift back to their booths and fires. The brawlers, now best friends or at least mutual survivors, walk off arm in arm, the chicken trailing behind like a deeply exhausted lawyer. You, meanwhile, sit back on your bench and sip the last of your ale. There's something about this moment, ridiculous, loud, completely unsupervised, that makes you appreciate the messiness of medieval life. Sure, the laws are weird. The courts are louder than useful. But somehow, it all works. People fight. People forgive. Sometimes in their underwear. You stretch out your legs and sigh. The fair isn't over. The night is still young. And if someone's going to get tried by chicken again, you'd like to be sober enough to remember it. Or not. The fair has mellowed into twilight. Lanterns swing from crooked poles, casting flickering shadows across muddy paths and crooked stalls. Somewhere in the distance, a woman sings a lullaby to no one in particular, and the smell of burnt onions drifts by on a lazy breeze. You should be heading back, maybe finding a place to sleep that doesn't involve hay or a goat, but your feet carry you elsewhere, toward the church. Because after brawls and beer and pantsless poultry trials, you feel strangely like hearing someone talk about your soul, or at least sit in a cool stone room where no one's trying to sell you turnip-flavoured cider. The church is open, always is. A modest stone building with narrow stained glass windows and a heavy oak door that creaks like a guilty conscience. You slip inside, the echo of your boots bouncing off cold flagstone. It's quiet, save for the low mumble of voices near the altar and the soft rasp of someone sweeping. You sit near the back, hoping not to be noticed. No such luck. The priest spots you immediately. He's short, round, and moving with the slow grace of someone who's carrying both wisdom and a full stomach. He nods once, then climbs the pulpit with a little more wobble than you'd expect from a man of God. He begins the sermon. It's supposed to be about moderation, about avoiding temptation, about the dangers of drunkenness and the sin of gluttony. He's got a strong voice, and he's quoting scripture like a man who's read it backwards and forwards and possibly upside down. His eyes scan the crowd, which consists of you, 3 sleeping farmers, a woman nursing a child, and a dog that wandered in and refuses to leave. He speaks of the righteous path, of purity, of resisting the devil's brew, and then he hiccups. It's soft, almost polite. But you hear it. Everyone hears it. You lean forward. Is it possible this priest is tipsy? He clears his throat, adjusts his robe, and continues. But now you're watching more closely. The way his hand trembles slightly on the edge of the pulpit, the faint flush creeping up his cheeks, the subtle slur curling around certain syllables like smoke. The sermon ends not with a fire and brimstone finale, but with a vague murmur about prayer and charity and not forgetting to hydrate. Then he steps down and walks, sways, toward the sacristy. You follow, because you're curious, and slightly drunk, and deeply committed to investigating ecclesiastical hypocrisy when you see it wobble in front of you. Behind the altar, in a small stone room cluttered with candles and hymnals and a suspicious number of mismatched goblets, the priest sits down heavily on a wooden stool and pours himself a drink. From a flask, hidden in his robe, he sees you, doesn't flinch. "Sit," he says. You do. He takes a sip, offers you the flask. You accept because it would be rude not to, and also because you're a deeply flawed human being who's already drank cider out of a boot this week. The liquid is warm, rich and unmistakably wine, spiced and sweet. Hippocrates again. The holy vintage. He wipes his mouth with his sleeve and sighs. Preaching is thirsty work, he says, especially when no one listens. You nod. He nods. There is a deep silence between you. Sacred, even. Here's your historical fact of the night. Clergy in the Middle Ages were not always models of sobriety. While monasteries brewed some of the best beer in Europe, local priests often had their own flasks tucked away. Church records from across the continent occasionally mention clerics caught drunk in public, accused of drinking during Mass, or scolded for turning confessional booths into private lounges. Officially, the Church condemned drunkenness. It was a sin, a temptation, a tool of the devil. But unofficially, let's just say the line between sacramental wine and recreational wine was blurry at best. The priest before you, his name is Father Giles, by the way, seems perfectly at ease with this contradiction. I preach about sin, he says, because I'm familiar with it. That's what makes me convincing. He chuckles. It turns into a cough. Then he takes another sip. You ask him how often he drinks. He looks at you like you just asked how often he breathes. Every day. Same as the blacksmith, the midwife, and the man who tried to ride a pig at last week's baptism. You wince. He shrugs. You can't be sober in a world like this, not all the time. That's how madness starts. There's a debate among historians about just how widespread clerical drinking was. Some argue it was the exception, others claim it was rampant, particularly in rural areas where oversight was minimal and the wine supply was generous. Letters from bishops occasionally read like frustrated Yelp reviews, complaints about friars passed out in gardens, monks skipping prayers for beer tastings, and priests who held mass while visibly swaying. You ask Father Giles if he feels guilty. Of course, he says. That's why I drink. You sit with that for a moment. The candle near the window flickers. The dog from the nave has wandered in and curled up on the floor like it owns the place. Father Giles pours another splash into your cup. You clink, because why not? Holy toasts count too. Then he gets serious. You think people come to church to hear about heaven, he asks. They come to rest, to sit, to breathe, to not be shouted at. Most days I think they'd prefer a warm seat and a short sermon, and maybe a cup of wine on the way out. You tell him that sounds like a tavern. He raises an eyebrow. Exactly! He stands, wobbles slightly, and straightens his robes with dignity that only partially survives the motion. Now, he says, we've got Vesper prayers in an hour. Try not to snore. You leave the sacristy mind-spinning, not just from the wine, but from the realization that even the moral anchors of society are floating slightly off course, and maybe that's what makes them human. The priest drinks, the monk brews, the baker samples, the brawler toasts. Everyone's just trying to stay afloat in a world made of mud and miracles. You step out into the night. The stars are faint behind a thin veil of clouds. The fair is still humming in the distance, like a song half remembered. You walk slowly, wine warm in your veins, wondering whether confession will hurt more than the hangover. Probably. But for now you feel blessed. Morning arrives cold and early, like a disappointed relative. The fair is packing up. Carts creak under piles of leftover produce and soggy bunting. The goat is still here, and it's still glaring at you. You wander the village in a daze, unsure whether you're hungover, mildly blessed, or both. But something's different today. There's greenery over the doorframes, pine branches woven with ribbons, bells tied to carts, a group of children dragging a log through the mud while singing at full volume, off-key and fearless. It's winter festival season, which means one thing, we're sailing. Or, as you're about to discover, structured holiday day drinking disguised as tradition. An older man with cheeks like wind-burnt apples beckons you toward the village green. It was sail day, he says, like it explains everything, and in a way it does. You follow, because your curiosity is louder than your common sense, and also because he's holding a cup of something steaming and mysterious. Soon, you're swept into the crowd. Everyone is holding mugs, everyone is singing, and everyone is drinking. Welcome to the Middle Ages' most chaotic and delightful seasonal ritual. Here's your historical fact for the day. Wassailing comes from the Old English toast Waes Hael, meaning be in good health. It started as a winter tradition to bless the apple orchards. People would march out, singing loudly, pouring cider on tree roots, and occasionally hanging pieces of toast in the branches. Yes, actual toast. For the spirits, or the birds, or both, it's all a bit blurry. Over time, wassailing became a broader celebration, half prayer, half party. Villagers would go house to house, singing carols demanding food and drink, and generally causing gentle, joyful chaos. Think of it as caroling, but louder, drunker, and with a much higher chance of someone falling into a hedge. You take your first sip of the wassail, it's hot spiced cider mixed with ale and honey, tasting like mulled fruit and reckless optimism. It warms you immediately from your lips to your boots. Someone hands you a second cup before you can finish the first. The singing starts again. It's a long, rambling tune about figgy pudding and noble lords and possibly something about geese. You don't know the words, but that doesn't stop you from joining in. Loudly. Terribly. You're bundled up in a borrowed cloak, arm in arm with a shepherd and a weaver who's already lost one mitten. Together you march through the snow-dusted streets to the next house, where the host greets you with a tray of meat pies and more wassail. "To the trees!" someone shouts. And suddenly the whole group veers toward the orchard on the edge of the village. What happens next is equal parts spiritual and ridiculous. The villagers circle the oldest apple tree, raise their mugs and begin chanting. Then they pour cider on the roots. Then someone climbs the tree to tie bread to the branches. No one explains why. No one needs to. It's tradition. It might be pagan, it might be Christian, it might be something they made up last year. But it feels real, and in your slightly inebriated state, it also feels important. There's a moment, brief but powerful, where the wind dies down, the cider steams in the cold, and the whole crowd hums a low note together, harmonized by accident. It's peaceful, almost sacred, and then someone burps loud enough to startle a bird and the moment is gone. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In some regions, particularly in southern England, wassailing involved designating a wassail queen who would lead the rituals, carry the bowl, and sometimes choose which trees to bless. In other places, wassailers wore costumes, animal masks, straw cloaks, horns, blending fertility rituals and harvest superstitions into a drink-fueled parade. There were songs to appease spirits, chants to scare off demons, and toasts to guarantee a good crop. Which leads us to your scholarly debate. Was wassailing a Christianized pagan ritual? Was it just an excuse for free booze? Or was it a sincere communal expression of hope in the dead of winter? Scholars can't agree, and honestly neither can you. Because now you're back in the village square raising your third or maybe fifth cup of hot ale cider, singing a new song about a boar's head and dancing in slow, muddy circles with people whose names you'll forget by morning. It doesn't matter, you're one of them now. The old man from earlier claps you on the back. "Still alive, I see," he laughs. "This'll fix you up better than cabbage leaves and pickled eel, eh?" You nod, grinning like an idiot. Because yes, somehow this blend of ancient tree blessing, singing and hot booze is the most alive you've felt since your journey began. Later, at a makeshift feast near the fire, you eat roasted chestnuts, boiled carrots, and a slice of something that might be cake or might be a weapon. More wassail flows. People are laughing, crying, hugging, shouting, and occasionally proposing marriage to bread loaves. You meet a woman who claims she saw the apple tree wink at her. You meet a man who insists he's been the official toast hanger for 16 years, and no one does it better. You meet a child wearing a goat skull on their head who tells you solemnly, "This is for fertility." You nod, not sure how to respond. You take another drink instead. Eventually the crowd thins. People stagger home, linked arm in arm, humming the last verses of the wassail song. The fires die down, the cider cools. You sit by a barrel staring up at the sky, your cheeks flushed, your breath fogging in the cold air. The stars are sharp tonight, glittering like cold pins stuck in black velvet. Somewhere out there is the future. But right now, in this strange, cheerful village of tree blessers and ale slingers, the only thing that matters is that you are warm, full, slightly drunk, and vaguely magical. You don't know if the trees are blessed, you don't know if the spirits are appeased, but your belly is full of fire, your heart is light, and your cup is empty, for now. And you hear there's another tradition tomorrow involving masks, riddles, and a drink that might include raw egg. Naturally, you're going. You wake up with dried cider on your tunic, a pine twig in your hood, and a vague sense that you may have accidentally blessed a goat last night. The fire pit is cold now, just a ring of ash and muddy footprints, and a half-eaten meat pie rests beside your head like an offering. You're unsure whether to eat it or bury it with honours. Your joints ache. Your mouth tastes like burnt apples and distant regret. This is no longer just hangover territory, you've entered a new realm. Something deeper, something more existential. And wouldn't you know it, someone has the perfect solution. Hair of the dog, asks a figure leaning casually against a barrel, holding a small mysterious bottle. He's got the look of a man who sells things no one asks too many questions about. Hood half up, smile too wide, and eyes like he's seen 5 versions of you already today. You accept the bottle, you always do, and you take a cautious sip. It's not ale, it's not wine, it's not even the cider spice soup from yesterday. It's something else entirely. Sharp, hot. It burns your throat and warms your insides like you just swallowed an argument. It doesn't taste like anything found in nature. It tastes like fire pretending to be fruit. You cough. Strong water, the man says with a wink. Medicinal, of course. Of course. Welcome to the age of early distillation, when alcohol stopped being just a beverage and became something far more potent, mysterious, and allegedly curative. The beginnings of spirits, and medieval people were just starting to figure out what to do with it. Here's your historical fact of the day. By the High Middle Ages, alchemists and physicians in Europe had begun to master the art of distillation, concentrating alcohol into what they called aqua vitae, or water of life. It wasn't for casual drinking, not yet. It was medicinal, sacred, experimental. It was meant to preserve health, purify the body, and in some cases preserve organs in jars, as one does. But of course, if something can get you drunk faster, someone's going to drink it on purpose, especially you. The man with the bottle tells you he learned the process from a wandering monk, or maybe a Moorish trader, or maybe it was a dream. The story changes every few seconds. All you know is that this little bottle contains something that could either cure your hangover or erase the concept of time. You take another sip. It's worse, but also better. Your sinuses open like someone kicked them. Your brain fog clears. You can hear again. A bell tolls somewhere in the distance, and it feels like it's happening inside you. Around the square, other bottles are being passed discreetly. Small ones, glass or glazed ceramic, stoppered tightly. This is not the kind of drink that comes in tankards. It's not social. It's whispered, hidden, almost reverent. You sit down beside an apothecary stall. A woman with ink-stained fingers is grinding herbs into a paste. Her shelves lined with little flasks, dried roots, powders, and scrolls that look like they've never been dusted. She catches you eyeing her collection and slides something toward you. For the nerves, she says. You open it. It smells like rosemary and liquor and fear. You drink it. Your ears pop. The apothecary explains that she uses distilled alcohol to extract properties from plants. Spirits of wine, she calls it. It's a base for tinctures, potions, and salves. Good for digestion. Excellent for melancholy. Can even help remove lice, she adds pointedly. You nod, slowly scoot away. Here's your quirky fringe fact. In the 13th and 14th centuries, medicinal spirits were prescribed for everything from toothaches to plague prevention. Some texts claimed aqua vitae could extend life. Others suggested it boosted memory or warmed the humours. One enthusiastic alchemist even wrote that it could restore youth, though notably, he died young. As you walk through the stalls, more remedies are offered. An oil infused with the distillate of juniper and goat tongue. A tonic made from the tears of a virgin and a very brave apple. A cordial that's just straight alcohol with 3 rose petals floating in it, described as gentle on the stomach. You buy that one. It is not gentle on the stomach. Here comes your scholarly debate of the day. Did medieval folks really believe in these miracle cures, or was it just clever marketing with a sprinkle of superstition? Some historians argue that early distillers and alchemists genuinely thought they were creating health elixirs, not party fuel. Others say people knew exactly what they were doing and just wrapped it in Latin to avoid judgment. Meanwhile, in the present tense of your experience, you've now sampled 5 different types of strong waters, each more aggressive than the last. You're not entirely sure where your legs are, but you assume they're still attached. The village spins a little when you turn your head. But hey, your headache is gone. You settle on a bench by a fire pit watching an old man try to light his pipe with a flaming brand while holding his bottle of aquavitae at arm's length, like it's going to whisper secrets to him. He sees you, grins with 3 teeth, and toasts silently. You toast back. The fire cracks. Somewhere a flute plays a soft tune. The apothecary is arguing with a friar over whether brandy is holier than beer. You think you see the goat again, now wearing a ribbon and possibly judging you. You remember the priest's words from the other night. That's how madness starts. And maybe this is madness. Drinking things you don't understand. Brewed in cauldrons by people who believe in liver-balancing spirits. Trusting bottles with no labels. Toasting strangers with something that smells like it could strip varnish. But maybe it's also something else. Curiosity. Bravery. Or just a good old-fashioned medieval coping mechanism. Because whether it comes in a chalice, a mug, or a tiny bottle stoppered with wax and mystery, people will always chase that brief blurry moment where the world feels less cold, the future less frightening, and the body just barely manageable. You lie back on the bench, the taste of juniper still on your tongue, the warmth blooming deep in your chest. Someone offers you a drink that glows faintly blue in the dark. You take it, naturally. You're standing ankle-deep in mud, slightly glowing from whatever it was you drank last night, and staring down a rutted road that winds toward a distant village with smoke curling from its chimneys. The sky is grey, the wind smells like sheep, and your boots squelch every time you move. But you've made a decision. You're going on a medieval bar crawl. Not that anyone calls it that, of course. Here it's just visiting, or making the rounds, or finding out who still owes you a drink. But it's the same spirit. One village, then the next, and the next after that. Drinking at every stop, meeting every odd soul who pours their own version of happiness into a clay mug. You hitch a ride with a cart full of onions and a man who might be a monk, or just deeply committed to brown robes. He drops you off at the edge of the first village with a cheerful wave and no explanation. You wave back, already spotting the first target, a timber-framed alehouse with a faded sign featuring a duck holding a spoon. You don't question it. Inside it's smoky, low-ceilinged, and filled with the quiet murmurs of people who have been drinking since sunrise and see no reason to stop. The barkeep, a woman with arms like firewood bundles, serves you a house ale without a word. It's bitter, flat, and inexplicably gritty. You drink it anyway. Rule 1 of the crawl, no turning down drinks. You nod politely, drop a coin on the counter, and squish your way back outside. Second village, a crooked lane, 3 pigs, 1 angry rooster, and a tavern with a thatched roof that looks like it's holding itself up out of spite. The ale here is better, darker, with a note of something sweet you can't quite place. The man behind the counter swears it's figs and fishbone and laughs when you gag. He refills your cup. You drink. It tastes less like figs now and more like guilt. Rule 2, never ask for ingredients. You stumble out slightly warmer, slightly weirder, and absolutely ready for the third stop. The third village has a tiny roadside stall run by an elderly couple, who greet you like you're a long-lost relative, and immediately pour something into a horn cup. You ask what it is. They say, a gift from the bees. It's mead, strong, golden, floral and sticky enough to glue your teeth together. You sit with them by a fire pit as their chickens walk over your boots, and the woman tells you a story about a man who drank 15 horns of mead and thought he was a turnip for 3 days. You believe her. Here's your historical fact of the day. Medieval travel often included stopping at local alehouses or inns, not just to rest, but to drink. There were no brand names, no menus, no standardized brewing practices. Every stop meant a different recipe, a different strength, a different level of personal risk. A medieval bar crawl was a tasting tour of regional chaos. You wipe the mead from your chin, thank the couple, and limp toward village number 4. This one is larger. It has cobbled streets and a church and at least 2 cats that do not like you. You find the alehouse near the square, an actual 2-story building with a wooden beam that claims it's been standing since the Great Flood. You don't ask which one. Inside there's a fire roaring, musicians tuning badly, and 3 kinds of ale. You ask for the one called Dead Man's Comfort. It's pitch black, syrupy, and tastes like burnt raisins and secrets. It also goes straight to your knees. Rule 3, pace yourself. You forget this immediately. You make it to the 5th village by leaning on a fence post, then a tree, then a man who turns out to be a statue. The wind has picked up. Your cloak is damp. You've stepped in something, hopefully mud. But ahead, you see the glow of torches and hear the unmistakable sound of rowdy laughter. The alehouse here is built partially into the hillside like a burrow. The air inside is thick with smoke and meat fat and spilled beer. There are no tables, just benches and barrels. You're handed something without asking. You drink it. It's hot, spiced, sour, somewhere between a wine and a threat. Someone says it's from a foreign merchant who passed through last spring. Someone else says it was fermented in a boot. No one seems to care. You sit, you breathe, you stare into the fire and try to remember your name. Here's your fringe fact for this leg of the crawl. Some medieval travellers used alcohol as currency. Not just buying drinks with it, but actually trading small quantities for favours, like a dry place to sleep, a horse to borrow, or information. A strong bottle of something homemade could be worth more than coins, especially if it didn't kill you. Your own bottle is long gone. You're living drink to drink now, bonded to the road, slurred in speech, staggering in spirit. But also, strangely, at peace. It starts to rain by the 6th village. You barely notice. You arrive soaked, cheeks flushed, one boot partially destroyed. The innkeeper gives you a look that says, "This again," and pours you something called Old Saint's Brew. You ask what's in it. She says, "Don't worry, the bones are decorative." You pretend not to hear that and drink anyway. Your scholarly debate of the night. Were medieval people aware of how strong their drinks were, or were they constantly surprised? Some claim early distillers and brewers kept careful records and knew exactly what they were doing. Others suggest most folks just hoped for the best and planned for a long nap. You're very much in camp, long nap. By the time you reach the 7th and final village, you're walking like a marionette that's lost half its strings. The sun has vanished, the road is a river of mud, and the tavern is a beacon of dim orange light. You collapse inside and order whatever you have that won't kill me. They serve you water. It's the best thing you've ever tasted. You sit in silence, the fire crackling beside you, your face warm and your limbs loose. Around you, other travellers doze or drink or quietly hum songs that have no name. No one asks where you came from. No one asks where you're going. You're simply one more person in the long chain of wanderers, drinkers and searchers. You've crawled through a living map of taste, community, chaos and culture, and your legs may never forgive you. But your spirit? It's buzzing. There's something strange in the air. Not just the usual blend of smoke, unwashed tunics and barley steam, something heavier, something tense. Even before you've opened your eyes, you can feel it clinging to your skin like a damp fog. You sit up on the floor of the tavern, last stop on your very regrettable bar crawl, and glance around. The hearth has gone cold. No music, no laughter, just murmurs. Whispers, really. Someone says the word you didn't want to hear. Plague. You step outside and into a world that has tilted slightly sideways. The village, which yesterday was bustling with hawkers and children, and the comforting stink of overcooked meat, is quieter now. Doors are shut, windows too. A black flag hangs outside the mill, and suddenly all those warm, cheery cups of ale, they're not for celebration anymore, they're for survival. You duck into a shop, the apothecary's daughter runs it now, her mother vanished overnight, and you ask, quietly, what people are drinking. She doesn't blink, just hands you a bottle. Wine with sage and vinegar, she says, and prayers. It's sharp, acidic, and deeply unpleasant. But you drink it anyway, because in a world where a sneeze might be a death sentence, even the foulest drink feels like protection. Here's your historical fact for the day. During outbreaks of the Black Death and other plagues, alcohol consumption didn't drop. It surged. People drank more, sometimes because they believed it helped ward off disease, sometimes because it was cleaner than water, and often because they just didn't want to feel anything anymore. Wine and ale became medicinal, mystical, and deeply emotional. You walk to the edge of the square, passing shuttered stalls and an empty fountain. A man in a cloak is painting crosses on doors. Another carts away a bundle wrapped in linen. You're not sure what's inside, you don't ask. At the tavern, the barkeep is still serving, behind a cloth curtain now. You slide a coin under and a clay cup comes out. Strong stuff. Tastes like dried time and despair. He doesn't speak, just nods. You sit in the corner and sip. The other patrons do the same. No songs, no clapping, just long, tired gulps and the occasional muttered prayer. Someone says their cousin was fine in the morning and dead by supper. Someone else says dogs are safe but cats are cursed. No one agrees on anything, except that the drink helps. Maybe. And here's your fringe fact. In some regions, people believed that certain kinds of alcohol could purify the body. Red wine mixed with herbs, mulled vinegar, distilled spirits with garlic, even beer brewed during specific lunar phases. If it smelled terrible and burned going down, someone probably swore it could cure the plague. You take another sip of your curtain-delivered mystery drink and try not to think about it too hard. There's a scholarly debate that would probably be more interesting if you weren't currently contemplating mortality. Some historians argue that heavy drinking during plague years led to long-term changes in European alcohol culture. Stronger spirits, more varied recipes, and the rise of taverns as social anchors. Others insist it was just a spike, a panic response, a temporary flood of booze in a drowning world. You lean your head back against the wall, cup resting on your knee. A monk is pacing outside the tavern, swinging a censer of smoke and muttering verses. It smells like burning sage and old incense. You raise your cup to him. He raises his censer in return. In a world this unpredictable, any ritual will do. You spend the day drifting from one building to the next. Everyone offers you a drink. A widow gives you clove wine for strength. A brewer hands you barley liquor to calm the spirits. A boy offers you a sip of something brown and sweet, saying it came from the apothecary's special shelf. You stop asking what's in things. By mid-afternoon you're comfortably numb. Your fear's still there, humming quietly in the background, but the drinks are louder. Eventually you find yourself at a small gathering outside the church. Just 5 or 6 people standing apart, cloaks pulled tight. One of them is telling stories. Not sermons, stories, old myths, tales of people who tricked death, outran it, outdrank it. The kind of folklore that only grows in times like this. One involves a man who brewed a beer so holy it repelled the plague. Another tells of a wandering merchant who offered wine to the dying and was blessed with eternal youth. You suspect both stories are full of hops and hot air, and still you listen and sip. Night falls. The village lights are dimmer than usual, no dancing, no songs, just flickering candles in windows and the clink of cups passed hand to hand. You lie on a bench near the fire, wrapped in someone else's spare cloak, the stars hidden behind a shroud of cloud and smoke. The drink in your belly burns gently, like a tiny hearth trying to hold back the cold. You think of the apple orchard, the singing, the laughter. You wonder if those people are still singing. or if they're drinking now like you in silence and hope. You close your eyes and dream of barrels and bees and a world where the worst thing you have to worry about is waking up with cabbage on your face and eel in your mouth. The road curves west now, cutting through low hills and frost-stiff meadows that crunch underfoot. Your boots are worn, your breath steams in front of you, and your head still hums with the lingering fog of yesterday's mystery drink. You're not dead, which feels like a small miracle. You've accepted that in the Middle Ages, death adjacent is just your new baseline. The next town appears like a bruise on the landscape, smoke curling from stone chimneys, crooked streets climbing uphill, and narrow timber buildings leaning into each other like they're conspiring. You follow the smell of roast lamb and wood smoke until you hit the market square, where a hawker shouts, "Imported delights," with the kind of confidence only someone selling snake oil, or actual snakes, can muster. You're curious. You're also broke, but you're also someone who has willingly swallowed liquid pain in the name of education, so naturally you step up. The merchant's table is cluttered with bottles, long-necked, squat, some wrapped in twine, others sealed with wax. Labels? Absolutely not. Branding isn't a thing yet, just guesswork and a lot of sniffing. This one, the hawker says, holding up a dark green bottle, comes from the east. Byzantium. You taste it. You hear angels. You ask what's in it. He hesitates. It's fruit and fire. You don't ask further. He pours a shot into a tiny pewter cup. You sip. It's sweet at first, almost syrupy. Then comes the burn, like someone tried to distill a bonfire through a raisin. It hits the back of your throat and detonates. You cough, blink, and question every decision you've ever made. He smiles. Only 4 coins a bottle? You laugh so hard your ribs ache. But here's your historical fact. Imported alcohol in the Middle Ages was a thing, and it was expensive. Trade routes, overland, riverbound, or maritime, connected Europe to the Byzantine Empire, the Islamic world, and beyond. Along those routes came wine from the Levant, palm spirits, date liquors, rice wine, mead laced with spices from India. Most people couldn't afford a sip, but if you had the coin, or knew someone who owed you a favour, you could taste a different world. Of course, whether it was good was another matter entirely. You browse the rest of the merchant's bottles. There's one sealed in red wax with a handwritten note that just says "Don't. You're deeply tempted." Another claims to be made from fermented figs and desert root. It smells like sadness and cardamom. A third, supposedly from Moorish Spain, has a bright golden colour and a scent like roasted oranges and regret. You sample it. It tastes complicated. Someone behind you mutters, "Waste of good coin," and spits. You turn. It's a woman in a battered cloak with a basket of dried herbs. She eyes the merchant's stand like it owes her money. "Imported drinks," she scoffs. "Every one of them tastes like old soup." You ask what she recommends. She fishes a flask from her basket and hands it over. Blackberry wine, local, made it myself, 2 days old. You sniff. It smells like actual fruit. You take a cautious sip. It's rough, tart, sharp, but it doesn't hurt, and it doesn't lie to you. "Better than that bottle of camel spit," she says, nodding toward the merchant. You nod back. She sells you the rest of the flask for 1 coin and a good story, which you make up on the spot about surviving a monk's experimental beer and waking up with a piglet named Simon. She laughs. "Heard worse." As you sit beneath a cold statue of St. Someone or other, sipping your rough but honest berry wine, you can't help but reflect on how fancy drinks get all the glory, even when they're half-lies in a pretty bottle. Here's your fringe fact. Nobles often imported alcohol to show off. The rarer the drink, the more power you projected. A banquet might feature wines from Cyprus, mead from Flanders, or even rosewater cordials from North Africa. It didn't matter if they tasted like candle wax. The point was status, not pleasure. You look at your wine. No status here, but it's drinkable. It's real. As the day wears on, you see the imported booze get passed around town. sometimes as gifts, sometimes as bribes, sometimes with heavy exaggeration. A man proposes a toast with something called dragon cordial, then passes out halfway through his own speech. A friar tries to use Byzantine wine in a sermon about eternal fire, and ends up weeping openly about his lost slippers. A wealthy trader boasts about his private stash of Persian date wine and offers you a sip. You decline. Once you've been lied to by a raisin-flavoured flamethrower, you learn your boundaries. Here comes the scholarly debate. Were these imported spirits actually as special as people claimed, or were they just overpriced novelties? Some historians argue that the trade in exotic alcohols helped spread distillation techniques and new flavour profiles across Europe. Others suggest that most imports were just regional drinks repackaged as foreign treasures and marked up accordingly. Medieval snake oil with extra cinnamon. You lean toward the second theory. By nightfall, the town's square becomes a stage. Someone lights a bonfire, a few fiddlers appear, and suddenly the air fills with music and drunken laughter. A man in a fur-trimmed coat stands on a barrel and recites a poem about lemons and lust. Someone throws a jug at him. You sit back and sip your blackberry wine, the honest kind. It's half empty now, warm from your hands. You raise your flask in mock toast toward the merchant and his line of fancy lies, then take another drink. Because here's the truth. The best alcohol doesn't travel far. It's brewed in kitchens, poured into reused bottles, and offered with a smirk and a story. And as much as you respect the ambition of someone who ferments fire and sells it in green glass, you'd take muddy feet and homemade berry wine any day. Well, maybe not any day. That bottle labelled "don't" still haunts your thoughts, but you'll save that decision for another road, another reckless night. Right now, you have firelight, music and wine made 2 days ago by someone who actually likes people. And that's good enough. You've barely had time to finish your last sip of blackberry wine before someone grabs you by the elbow and says, "You're helping brew." No room for debate, no explanation. Just a firm hand and a look that says, "Congratulations, you're a brewer now," or at least something close to one. The woman dragging you is named Edith. She walks fast, talks faster, and smells like burned grain and stubbornness. You follow her to a small timber structure just off the village green, low-roofed and warm inside with the scent of wet straw, boiled wort, and a hint of singed hair. "This is my brew house," she says, waving vaguely at everything like she's introducing a particularly chaotic relative. "We brew Mondays, bottle Thursdays, pray the rest of the time." She hands you a wooden paddle and points to a cauldron bubbling over a fire. "Stir clockwise. Always clockwise. Anti-clockwise brings wasps." You start to laugh. She doesn't. And that's how your brewing apprenticeship begins. Elbow deep in warm malt, eyebrows singed, under the stern eye of a woman who's brewed longer than you've been alive. Here's your historical fact for the day. Brewing in the Middle Ages was a regulated craft. Sort of. In theory, there were rules. In practice, those rules were vague, inconsistently enforced, and heavily flavoured with local custom, superstition, and occasional witch accusations. Especially for women like Edith, who brewed from home and sold locally, the line between honest work and suspicious sorcery could be dangerously thin. You ask what kind of rules she has to follow. She snorts. "There's the ale taster," she says. "He shows up when he's not drunk, pretends he knows what he's doing. Tells me my ale's too sour, then drinks 3 pints. Apparently every village has a designated ale taster, an official who's supposed to check for quality, safety and fair pricing. In reality, he's often the drunkest man in town and has strong personal opinions about hops, which by the way Edith doesn't use. "Hops are for cowards," she declares, ladling a thick liquid into a barrel. "I use Groot." You nod like you know what that is. She explains. Groot is a mix of herbs used to flavour and preserve beer before hops became popular. Yarrow, mugwort, bog myrtle, whatever's growing and hasn't been trampled by a goose. Every brewer has their own blend, passed down or invented on the spot. Hops, she claims, are what the new brewers use. Men, mostly. They say it lasts longer. She says it tastes like soap and sadness. You try a sip of her unfermented ale. It's earthy, sweet, herbal. Not bad. Then she adds a handful of crushed bark and a pinch of something that smells like damp leaves and burnt toast. What's that, you ask? Secret, she says. Possibly illegal. And here's your fringe fact. There were indeed medieval beer laws about what could and couldn't go into a brew, but they varied wildly by region, and were enforced with all the consistency of a sleep-deprived rooster. In parts of Germany, the famous Reinheitsgebot, beer purity law, would eventually dictate that beer could only contain water, barley and hops. But that didn't come until the 16th century. Before that, brewers threw in just about anything that didn't run away. Back in Edith's brewhouse, things are escalating. A chicken walks across the floor like it owns the place. A cat jumps onto a shelf and knocks over a jar of dried nettles. The cauldron is boiling again. You stir faster. "Don't let it stick," Edith shouts. "If it burns, we start over and you clean the pot." You stir like your life depends on it. Outside, the ale taster arrives. His boots are muddy. His cloak is inside out. He gives you a long, suspicious look and says, "Is that toadweed I smell?" Edith blocks the doorway with her body. "Absolutely not," she says. "Looks like toadweed," he mutters. "Looks like your last wife's stew," she replies. He grumbles, drinks a cup of her ale, then declares it acceptable, and wanders off, singing a song about trousers. You exhale? That was close. Edith grins. Toadweed's only illegal if you call it that. You learn a lot over the next few hours, how to strain out the mash, how to seal barrels with wax and curses, how to whistle to keep birds from flying into the cooling tub. You bottle a small cask and slap a symbol on the lid that means, according to Edith, no headaches, no regrets. You doubt that very much. Here's the scholarly debate for today. Did these early regulations actually improve beer quality, or just give local officials a reason to collect fines and pretend they were useful? Some historians argue that purity laws protected consumers from dangerous ingredients, like poisonous herbs or spoiled batches. Others believe the laws were more about controlling commerce and edging out small brewers, especially women. You lean toward the second opinion, mostly because Edith just told you a story about a rival brewer who reported her for witchcraft after she beat him in a taste test. "Joke's on him," she says. "He used pond water." The day ends with a small crowd outside her door. Regulars, farmers, a man with only one eyebrow. They line up for cups and jugs and whispered negotiations. You help pour, feeling oddly proud of the rough aromatic liquid sloshing from your barrel. It's not pretty, it's not refined, but it's alive, and it's yours. Sort of. As the sun sets, Edith hands you a cup and clinks hers against it. "To rule breakers," she says, "and toadweed." You drink. It's bitter, weirdly floral, and it makes your nose itch. You love it. Later that night you sit beside her fire, your boots drying by the hearth, your hands stained with grain, and your brain humming from the mix of labour and beer. Outside, the village snores. Inside, you feel like you've earned your place, at least until the ale taster sobers up and decides he doesn't like your face. But for now, you're part of the brew. You don't remember falling asleep in Edith's brewhouse. You only remember stirring something that smelled like smoked honey and wet stone, then sitting down for a minute, then darkness, heavy, dreamless. Now you wake to the sound of birds, not the sweet chirping kind, but the chaotic flapping of wings and a rooster screaming like it's auditioning for a tragedy. You sit up. The fire's gone cold, your mouth tastes like ashes and thyme, and you're very sure the rafters are breathing. You blink once, twice, no change. That's unusual. Edith is nowhere to be found. The brewhouse door is ajar. Your boots are on, but on the wrong feet, and the smell in the room, sharp, earthy, wrong. You stand slowly like a puppet with frayed strings, and stumble out into a world that looks just slightly off. The trees are too tall, the sun is too red, the sky is shimmering like it owes someone money. You stagger toward the village green and find it empty, silent, but not peacefully so. You pass a cart filled with turnips that seem to be humming. Or maybe that's your skull. This is not a hangover. This is something else. You sit on the edge of a well and try to remember everything you drank yesterday. Ale, mead, blackberry wine. Whatever Edith handed you in the late afternoon that smelled like mint and mushrooms. She said it was a special winter batch. She also said don't drink too much unless you want to see God. Apparently you took that as a challenge. Here's your historical fact. In the Middle Ages, most people brewed with what they had, and what they had wasn't always safe. Some local herbs used in group mixtures contained compounds that, in large quantities, could cause hallucinations, convulsions, or worse. Chief among the culprits, ergot, a fungus that grew on damp rye and barley. Consuming it could result in everything from mild visual distortions to full-on flesh-rotting madness. Modern historians call it ergotism. Medieval villagers called it St. Anthony's fire. And from the way your hands are trembling and the trees keep sighing at you, it's a safe bet that you've sampled something with a generous helping of ergot, or at least something adjacent to it. You lie down in the grass and stare at the sky. Clouds move like ships. The wind whispers your name. A cow walks past on two legs and says, "Shame about your liver." You nod solemnly. Here's your fringe fact. Some scholars believe that mass outbreaks of ergot poisoning, especially during damp years, may have sparked outbreaks of dancing plagues, religious visions, and even witch hunts. One theory suggests that some possessed villagers were simply tripping hard on contaminated bread and beer, and instead of a diagnosis, they got dunked in a river or burned at the stake. You sit up quickly, too quickly. The world does a slow somersault and lands crooked. Edith appears out of nowhere holding a bucket and wearing a wide grin. "Oh good," she says. "You're alive!" You try to speak, only bees come out. Metaphorically. Maybe. She squats beside you, offers you water, and explains that yes, last night's ale had a few extra ingredients. "Winter batch," she repeats, "for feasts, and visions, for the brave." You mumble something about the sky blinking at you. She nods. That means it's working. She helps you sit upright and pats your back like a proud teacher. "Don't worry," she says. "It wears off, eventually. Might be an hour, might be a day. Depends on your constitution." You don't remember your constitution. You're not entirely sure you still have one. She leaves you in the grass with a bowl of cold porridge and a firm warning not to wander into any bright doors or talk to the dog if it starts reciting scripture. You nod again. It seems wise. The hours crawl by, or maybe they gallop. Time no longer behaves. You spend some of it lying under the oak tree watching the leaves perform what may be interpretive dance. A squirrel tells you a joke you immediately forget but find hilarious. Someone nearby sings a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like a threat. And the porridge, surprisingly good. Here's your scholarly debate of the day. Did medieval people know their brews could cause hallucinations? Or did they just think God was feeling extra chatty that night? Some argue that certain brewers intentionally created psychoactive ales for rituals, vision quests, or religious experiences. Others say it was just bad storage and luck. Either way, no one wrote "may cause intense philosophical crises" on the barrels. As evening approaches, the world begins to straighten itself. Slowly, carefully. The colours dim. The trees resume their usual indifference. Your fingers remember how to bend. You can walk without narrating each step out loud. Edith checks on you again, handing you a small flask of her morning after cure. It tastes like vinegar and boiled socks, but it helps. "You're lucky," she says. "One lad from 2 villages over drank that stuff and tried to marry a fence." You thank her, or at least grunt in her direction. She grins and hands you a folded scrap of parchment. Her recipe, she says, but it's just a drawing of a chicken standing on a mushroom. You don't ask. You stay the night in her brewhouse, wrapped in a blanket that smells like herbs and smoke, your head finally quiet, your stomach only mildly rebellious. The hallucinations have faded. Probably. The rooster still looks suspicious, but maybe that's just its personality. You stare at the ceiling beams and think about how fragile everything is. Taste, memory, reality. and how one slightly damp sack of rye can turn a night of quiet drinking into a medieval fever dream. Still, you kind of want to try it again. You leave Edith's brewhouse at dawn, moving slowly, deliberately, like a man who's just spent a full day conversing with imaginary squirrels and is unsure whether the world has actually stopped breathing at him. The hallucinations are mostly gone, though the rooster still glares like it knows too much, and you're determined to keep both feet planted in something resembling reality today. Your boots squelch in the mud as you follow a winding road toward the next town, its pointed roofs clustered along a hillside like gossiping hens. This one's larger, stone-paved and bustling, with the kind of buildings that say, "We pay taxes sometimes." Artisans line the streets, blacksmiths, coopers, weavers, and someone selling roast onions from a wheelbarrow. You ask where the local alehouse is. The onion man sniffs, then jerks a thumb toward a wide timber building with a carved wooden sign hanging above the door. It's shaped like a mug, but the handle is a griffin. You don't ask why. You're tired of asking why. You step inside and find something different. It's quiet for one. No singing, no shouting, just murmured voices and the sound of pages turning. A fire crackles in a central hearth, casting warm light on stone walls covered in banners. Not royal banners, guild banners. Because this isn't just an alehouse, this is a guild hall. Specifically the local Brewers and Masons Guild, according to the embroidered cloth hanging near the door. And you, with your grain-stained sleeves and a head still full of toadweed aftermath, look just out of place enough to pass as a prospective member. A man approaches. He's tall, serious, and smells faintly of hops. His robe is too nice for a brewer, but his hands are calloused. He looks you over, then gestures toward a bench by the fire. "You here for membership?" he asks. You say nothing and nod slowly, which works for almost every medieval situation. He hands you a wooden cup, warm, foamy, and much too familiar. Ah, ale again. Back to the beginning. But this time, it's different. More refined. Balanced. Like someone actually measured things and didn't just dump herbs in a cauldron while hoping for divine intervention. "We brew for the builders," the man says, sitting beside you. "Cathedrals, bridges, halls. No one lays stone on an empty stomach." You sip. You nod. You pretend not to be mildly hallucinating still. Here's your historical fact. In medieval cities, many trades were organised into guilds, structured associations that managed training, pricing, quality, and legal protection. Brewing was no exception, and in places like London, Bruges, and Cologne, brewers' guilds were powerful, politically connected, and well organised. Some even had their own feast days, uniforms, and very strict recipe codes. You watch as a group of men in aprons and tunics gather around a long table, discussing barrels and malt ratios like diplomats in a high-stakes summit. One of them is sketching something that looks suspiciously like a fermentation diagram. Another is holding a scroll and nodding solemnly. This is not the chaotic brewing you've grown used to. This is structured, calm, terrifying. The tall man, his name is Elias, you finally learn, explains that the guild sets brewing standards for the entire region. Water quality checks, ingredient sourcing, measurement systems. They even assign apprentices. Everything is tracked. You ask about the fines. "Oh yes," Elias says. "Fines for weak ale, for overcharging, for poisoning the Lord Mayor last spring. Accidentally, of course." Of course. You get a tour. The back room is a mix of storeroom, laboratory, and drinking den. Rows of wooden tanks, glass bottles stoppered with wax, scales made of brass, a table full of dried herbs labelled in Latin and something that might be Flemish swearing, and on one wall, a painted chart of banned brewing ingredients. You read, dead man's toe, broom flower, cat gall, bones of questionable origin. You point. Elias shrugs. Happens more often than you'd think. Here's your fringe fact. In certain towns, brewing guilds formed strange alliances with other trades, most notably stonemasons. Why? Because where there's construction, there's labourers, and where there are labourers, there'd better be ale. Some guilds worked together so closely that apprentices were shared. An ale brewed for masons was optimised for strength, shelf life, and restorative value. Drinking and building, hand in hand. You sit in on a tasting session. It's part critique, part ceremony. Each brewer presents their latest batch. It's poured, sipped, swirled, judged on clarity, flavour, aftertaste, and moral character, which seems to be code for, does this make you want to fight your uncle? One young brewer presents an experimental ale made with juniper and dried cherries. It's met with polite silence and one cough that sounds suspiciously judgmental. Your turn. You hesitate, then pull out the small sealed bottle Edith gave you as a parting gift. She told you not to open it unless the ale was bad, the company worse, or you wanted to win an argument by default. You present it. Elias sniffs, sips. He goes silent. You brace for shame. Then he nods. Herbal, wild, a little violent. Another sip. I like it. You exhale. The guild begins to warm to you. They ask questions. You invent answers. Someone pours a strong honey ale with a rosemary finish. Someone else shares a beer that smells like smoke and tastes like firewood. Surprisingly good. You pass around your notes, they're made up. You criticise a batch for lacking backbone. Everyone nods like you've said something profound. You've found your people. Here's your scholarly debate of the day. Did guilds stifle creativity in brewing by forcing conformity and standardization, or did they preserve brewing knowledge through generations? Some argue guilds made beer safer, more consistent. Others say they crushed experimental brewers, especially women and peasants, by demanding fees, paperwork and secret handshakes. You sip your rosemary ale and wonder what Edith would think of this place. You're pretty sure she'd set it on fire just to see what would crawl out. The night ends with a formal toast. All brewers, all guild members, raise their mugs toward the central beam and shout something in Latin you don't catch but pretend to understand. You drink. You're not officially a member, but you are unofficially respected, and that's almost better. They offer you a bed in the loft, straw and warm, with a view of the fermentation barrels below. You lie there, stomach full, slightly buzzed, dreams swirling with malts and stone arches and the faint memory of a hallucinated goat. The rafters no longer breathe. The ale is good, and for once you're drunk and professional. You wake up in the brewer's loft with a mouth like a parchment scroll, and the vague sensation that someone hit you with a brick made of yeast. Sunlight filters through a tiny window, illuminating floating dust and the unfortunate reality of your clothes, which now smell permanently of barley and burned rosemary. You stretch, creak, and descend into the main hall where a few guild members are already sipping something dark from polished wooden cups. You nod. They nod. Nothing more needs to be said. But just as you reach for the communal jug of breakfast ale, a mild, toasty brown with notes of "please don't talk to me yet," the front door slams open. In stomps a man in official-looking boots and an expression carved from lemon. He's holding a scroll, never a good sign. "Name?" he demands. You blink. Is all you manage. "Don't play dumb, you were seen drinking yesterday." You glance around. Everyone was drinking yesterday. "In public," he adds sharply, "on a day of fast and penance." You try to remember what day it is. You cannot. Time has blurred into a long, heady fog of ale, pies, and regretful cheese. "Yesterday," he continues, unrolling the scroll with flair, "was St. Balthild's day. No ale before Vespers, no wine in open air, no mead within 20 paces of a cross." You blink again. One of the brewers helpfully coughs. "Pretty sure it's St. Bibiana's day." The official glares. Not the point. And just like that, you've been fined. 4 coins. Or, as he generously offers, 3 coins and a day in the stocks. You hand over the coins. Because you've seen the village stocks. Because you've been in the village stocks. Because they smell like cabbage and disappointment. Here's your historical fact of the day. Medieval alcohol laws were absolutely everywhere, and often made absolutely no sense. They could be based on the religious calendar, local harvests, regional shortages, moral panics, political statements, or someone waking up in a bad mood. Some towns allowed beer on Sundays but not wine. Some banned ale on fast days but made exceptions for small beer. Some restricted drinking near churches. Others only allowed drinking at churches. And enforcing these laws, that was a game unto itself. You follow the official outside as he continues his rounds. In the span of 10 minutes, he finds a merchant for selling warm ale, supposedly a crime against taste, scolds a monk for brewing during morning prayers, and lets a nobleman go entirely because his horse looked official. You catch up with him and ask the obvious, who makes these laws, and he pauses. Depends, he says. Sometimes the church, sometimes the local lord, sometimes the mayor's wife because she found her husband in a barrel again. You thank him for his honesty. He fines you for sarcasm. You walk back into town feeling like you've been pickpocketed by bureaucracy. At the village square, a few townsfolk are gathered around the notice board. You join them and spot today's posted laws, handwritten, revised, and possibly composed by someone mid-swig. Rule 1. No drunken singing before noon. Rule 2. Wine allowed with meat but not fish. Rule 3. Fish that pretend to be meat are subject to inspection. Someone whispers, "Remember the eel pie incident?" You pretend not to hear. Just down the lane you find a tavern with a discreet side door and a bored-looking man guarding it. "Are you serving today?" you ask. He glances around and nods slowly. "Only if you say the password." You wait. He leans in. "The password is, 'I'm very thirsty.'" You say it. He lets you in. The tavern is dim and crowded with locals who, it seems, are all technically breaking a law or two. A woman drinks from a teacup to avoid suspicion. A man has his ale inside a hollowed-out turnip. Two men are deep in conversation over something labelled medicinal syrup that smells exactly like brandy. This is the other half of medieval drinking, navigating the rules, not obeying them, dancing around them with clever cups and saintly loopholes. Here's your fringe fact. Some monasteries brewed liquid bread during Lent, dark, rich beer designed to sustain monks without violating the food ban. In Bavaria, monks would send a cask of this beer to Rome for papal approval, but the beer spoiled on the journey, tasted awful by the time it got there, and the Pope approved it without question. Thus, the monks kept drinking it. Fasting, of course. Fasting responsibly. You nurse your ale in a teacup and talk to a woman named Agnes who claims she once got arrested for not drinking. "What?" "True," she says. "It was a feast day. I turned down a wine toast. They thought I was possessed." You raise your cup, she clinks it. You both drink. Later that afternoon, you witness a mock trial outside the bakery. A boy is accused of selling watered-down ale. The judge, who may or may not be a goat farmer in a borrowed hat, finds him guilty of offending the palate and orders him to drink his own product in front of everyone. He does. The crowd winces. Justice is served. Here comes your scholarly debate. Were medieval alcohol laws really about health, safety and morality, or were they just tools to control the lower classes while the wealthy drank freely? Some historians argue that the laws reflected genuine concern over disorder, idleness, and quality control. Others point out that fines were rarely enforced against nobility, and often doubled as revenue streams for towns and churches. You look over and see the local lord drinking openly beside the church steps, with a meat pie and a fish inside it. You say nothing. You end the day at the edge of town, sitting on a fence, sipping a herbal tonic that's almost entirely brandy. The sun is setting. The rooster from the last village has somehow followed you and now perches nearby like an unpaid intern. You reflect on the rules, on the loopholes, on the delicate, absurd ballet of staying legally buzzed in a world that punishes both overindulgence and abstinence. You think about St. Balthild. You wonder if she drank. You raise your cup anyway. To her. To Agnes. To eel pies and papal paperwork and turnip cups. To the ungovernable spirit of drinking responsibly, but only barely. There's something about the early morning clang of armour that makes your stomach churn. And not just because you're hungover, and someone nearby is eating pickled eggs with gusto. No. It's the unmistakable feeling that today is going to be one of those days, the kind with too much cheering, not enough planning, and a near-fatal encounter with a lance. the town is buzzing. Bright banners flap from the rooftops, children dart between carts, vendors are shouting about roasted chestnuts and miracle ointments, and in the centre of the green, 2 wooden platforms have been hastily assembled into a makeshift jousting arena. It's tournament day, which, in this town, means drink first, and then charge at your enemies with pointy sticks while balancing on a horse. Naturally, you watch from the shade of a barley cart as 2 knights ride slowly into the ring, helmets glinting, plumes bobbing. One of them lifts his visor to take a swig from a leather flask. Mead, almost certainly. Possibly worse. You look over at a cluster of squires polishing armour and passing around a bottle of what smells like fermented apple peels and ambition. One of them hiccups, then tries to fit his helmet on backward. And here's your historical fact of the day. Tournaments in the Middle Ages were rowdy affairs where the line between sport and survival blurred quickly. While there were rules, sometimes elaborate ones, they were loosely enforced. And yes, drinking was common. Mead, ale, wine, all part of the pre-game ritual. It wasn't unusual for knights to toast before mounting up, or even take a swig mid-match if the steward wasn't looking. But today? Today is special. Today the prize isn't gold or land. It's an entire barrel of honey mead, gifted by the local Brewers Guild and blessed by a priest who may or may not be drunk himself. The first match begins with much fanfare. Trumpets, cheering, a man loudly reciting the rules from memory, and probably inventing half of them. Then the knights lower their lances and charge. One promptly drops his lance, wobbles sideways in the saddle, and crashes into a hay bale. The other breaks his lance against a wooden pole not even remotely near his opponent, then raises both hands in victory like he's just conquered France. The crowd erupt. You're not sure what the rules were, but apparently someone won. Drinks all around. You make your way to the sidelines, where a woman in a padded coif is selling hot cider, with a generous splash of pear liquor in each cup. She winks as she hands you one and whispers, helps you see the hits better. You take a sip, it's delicious, and probably dangerous. By the time the third round begins, half the participants are visibly swaying, and one has declared loudly that he's fighting in honour of a woman made entirely of bees. He loses quickly. Still, the tournament presses on. Horses circle, blunted lances crash. Someone throws a meat pie into the ring for reasons unknown. You ask the cider woman if this level of chaos is normal. "Oh, this," she says. "This is nothing. Last year someone tried to joust with a goat." You nod as if that clarifies anything. Here's your fringe fact. Some medieval tournaments blurred the line between martial sport and drunken spectacle so thoroughly that towns began regulating alcohol sales during events. Certain regions banned drink stalls within sight of the ring. Others issued fines for intoxicated participants. Of course, enforcement was spotty, and not technically drunk became a popular legal defence. Back in the ring, a new challenger approaches. He's tall, armoured head to toe, and absolutely radiating mead. His squire shouts encouragement as he mounts his horse, by sort of flinging himself upward and hoping for the best. You recognise him. It's Elias, the brewer from the guild hall. You call out, "Should you be jousting after 3 pints of honey mead?" He shouts back, "That was breakfast!" The crowd roars. His opponent, a younger knight with a suspiciously shiny helmet, narrows his eyes and knocks back a cup of something fizzy before signalling readiness. The trumpet sounds. They charge. And for a brief shining moment it looks almost majestic. Horses thundering, armour gleaming, lances steady. Then Elias sneezes, mid-charge, and somehow manages to turn his lance sideways and clothesline both himself and his opponent in a spectacular double tumble that sends them rolling like armoured potatoes. The horses keep going, bless them. Silence falls. Then, wild applause. Someone tosses a laurel wreath into the ring. Elias sits up, helmet askew, grinning. "I call that a draw." You've never been prouder. Here's your scholarly debate for the day. Were tournaments genuine displays of martial skill, or just elaborate drinking parties with horses? Scholars argue both. Some emphasise the military training and social hierarchy enforced through formalised duels. Others point to records of fistfights, drunken falls, and lance-related accidents, as evidence that many of these events were, in fact, barely contained carnivals with jousting as the sideshow. As the day fades, the final match is called off due to general disarray and poor visibility, which is a polite way of saying half the contestants can't stand up straight, and the sun's in their eyes. The mead barrel is awarded jointly to the two least injured knights, one of whom is still trying to remove his gauntlet using only his teeth. The crowd filters out, buzzing with excitement and buzzing from something a bit stronger. Children pretend to joust using sticks. A chicken gets knighted by mistake. You finish your cider and feel weirdly content. Not safe, mind you, never safe, but content. Because if there's anything more medieval than combining alcohol and aggressive sports, it's doing it in front of a cheering crowd with zero protective gear and a priest who's clearly had 3 too many. You walk back toward the inn, the evening sky painted in ale-coloured shades of amber and rose. You survived another day? Barely. You wake in a hayloft with a black eye, a splinter in your thigh, and a mouth that tastes vaguely of clove and battlefield. The tournament is a blur. You remember cheering, falling off something that probably wasn't your horse, and a man trying to sell you blessed shin armour made from eel skins. You remember buying it. You do not remember putting it on. The eel armour is thankfully missing, but your headache is not. After a mug of cold water and a loaf of yesterday's bread, somehow both too stale and too soft, you stagger toward the road, determined to escape town before anyone hands you a lance or another legal notice. Your path leads you uphill towards stone walls and the quiet chime of a bell. A monastery. The sign outside is simple: Abbey of St. Mildred, Keeper of the Yeast. You assume it's a joke. It isn't. A monk opens the heavy wooden door with the kind of serene smile only people who sleep 8 hours a night and don't joust can manage. He doesn't ask your name or your business, just hands you a cloak, nods toward a bench and offers you a cup of something dark and foamy. It smells like toasted grain, spice and holiness. You sip. You see God, or at least a warm blur that says kind things and tastes like caramel. This is monastic beer, and it's leagues above anything you've had in a smoky tavern or the back of a goat cart. Here's your historical fact. Many of the best beers in medieval Europe were brewed by monks. Monasteries were centres of learning, science, and, you guessed it, fermentation. With access to clean water, herbs, brewing tools, and a strict daily schedule, monks refined the brewing process into something nearly divine. Their beer wasn't just for pleasure, it was for sustenance, especially during fasting periods when solid food was off limits. Beer became liquid bread, fortified with grain, calories, and good intentions. The monk who served you sits nearby, humming quietly and mending a sandal. You ask what's in the beer, and he replies devotion and nutmeg. You ask if there are rules for brewing here. He smiles. Many, but none we fear. It turns out monastic brewing is as much ritual as recipe. Each stage is measured, blessed, and written down in ink made from crushed berries. The yeast strain is older than the abbey itself. They keep it alive in a jar wrapped in wool and stored in a cupboard labelled "Do Not Touch," not even a little bit. You follow your guide, Brother Oswin, into the brewing room. Sunlight filters through stained glass, casting pale blue and gold across copper kettles and stone fermentation tubs. The air is warm and heavy with malt and old prayers. A fellow monk is singing to a barrel. It's not weird. It's encouraged. You ask why the beer is so good here. Oswin thinks for a moment. Because we fear neither time nor patience, and because we do not dilute our souls, or our wort. A pause. Also, Brother Cuthbert adds cinnamon when no one's looking. You try a second beer. This one is stronger, thicker, almost chewy. It tastes like dark bread and dried figs and confession. And here's your fringe fact. Monastic beers weren't just for monks. They were sold to travellers, pilgrims, nobles, and even the occasional royal. Some monasteries became famous for their brews, drawing visitors from miles away, not for relics or blessings, but for a jug of the good stuff. The monks used the profits to fund hospitals, scriptoriums, or sometimes better brewing equipment. Priorities. You help stir the mash. It's harder than it looks. The monk watching you chuckles when you nearly fall in. Do not become the beer, he says gently. You sit in the herb room next. Dozens of jars line the walls. Coriander, sage, juniper, wormwood, lavender. Each carefully dried, labelled and measured. The monks experiment, but slowly. A little basil here. A hint of anise there. Every batch is recorded in a giant leather book kept under lock and key. You glimpse the title, Liber Fermentatius. Probably not Latin. Definitely serious. Here's your scholarly debate. Did monastic brewing preserve ancient techniques and elevate quality? Or did it simply benefit from better conditions and resources? Some scholars credit monasteries with keeping the art alive through centuries of war and famine. Others say they were just the only ones who could afford decent equipment and uninterrupted time. Either way, the results speak for themselves. You finish your cup and are offered a third. You hesitate, you accept. This one is different again. Lighter, but with a strange citrus aftertaste. Experimental, Oswin says. Brother Alaric read something about oranges. He has ideas. You like Brother Alaric. As evening falls, the monks gather in the refectory for a meal. Simple fare, bread, cheese, lentil stew. But every plate comes with a small clay cup of beer. You sip, feeling the day settle into your bones, the warmth blooming from belly to fingertips. No shouting, no drunken brawls, no eel pie fights, just quiet company, soft chants, and the low rumble of monks discussing fermentation temperatures. You ask if they ever get drunk. Brother Oswin smiles. We get reflective. You ask if they ever get bored. He laughs. Never. Brewing is theology in a cup. Each batch teaches humility. He raises his glass. You raise yours. To humility, he says. To yeast, you reply. He chuckles. They are often the same. Later you're shown to a small cell with a straw bed and a warm wool blanket. The walls are stone. The silence is vast. You lie there, thinking about the difference between the taverns and this place. Both pour drinks. Both bring people together. But one does it with noise and chaos, and the other with candlelight and soft voices. You still love the noise. But this is a different kind of drunk, a thoughtful one. You fall asleep with the scent of malt in your hair, and the soft echo of monks singing somewhere down the hall, praising the same miracle over and over, grain, water, time, and the gentle touch of something unseen. You wake to the quiet, contemplative calm of monastery bells. Soft chimes echo through the stone halls, gentle as fog over the hills. For the first time in days, your head doesn't feel like it's been used to test club durability. Your limbs ache pleasantly from labour, your stomach is settled, and there's the faintest trace of cinnamon on your breath. All in all, you feel well, which is suspicious in itself. You pack your things, thank the monks for their hospitality, and for not letting you fall into a vat, and step back out onto the winding road, your cloak freshly laundered and your heart strangely full. It lasts exactly 3 miles, because that's where you run headlong into a village fair so loud, so frantically overstuffed with colour, livestock, and people already tipsy before lunch, that your inner peace is immediately flattened under a cart full of turnips. You barely get your bearings before someone throws a ball of cheese at your head and yells, "You're in!" You're what now? Welcome to the wide, idiotic and deeply human world of medieval drinking games. There's no explaining how it starts. One moment, you're dodging dairy projectiles, and the next, you're holding a clay cup surrounded by shouting strangers, a goat, and someone with half an eyebrow and a dangerous glint in their eye. "You drink," says a man with twigs in his beard, "then spin the bladder." He points to a deflated pig's bladder hanging from a stick. Then what? Then we find out if you can still dance. You sigh. Of course, here's your historical fact. Medieval folks absolutely loved their games, especially when alcohol was involved. While some were innocent, like dice or riddles, many turned into chaotic contests of endurance, wit, or plain foolishness. Drinking games were a social glue, often woven into festivals, weddings, harvest celebrations and long winter nights, and no two villages played the same way. The game you're in now is called Bladder Bounce. It involves taking a gulp, spinning the pig bladder, and then either answering a question, performing a task, or, in one poor man's case, singing an ode to a cheese wheel. The rules change every time someone burps. You drink. It's bad ale, flat and oddly spicy. You spin the bladder, it points to you. "Ah," says the crowd in unison, "a tale." They demand a story. You panic, then blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, a mangled version of Edith's brewing disaster involving herbs, hallucinations and a chicken who spoke in rhymes. They love it. You survive another round. Next up is a game called Catch the Cup, which is less of a game and more of a group exercise in spillage. Players sit in a circle, passing a cup of wine hand to hand while music plays. When the music stops, whoever's holding the cup must drink it, without using their hands. You watch a man bend so dramatically to sip that he nearly headbutts a goose. And here's your fringe fact. Some medieval games were deliberately designed to promote bonding and loosen tongues. From the Norse bragafull, a ritual boasting cup, to the French jeu de la tâche, where drinkers made each other complete absurd tasks. These games often blended storytelling, roleplay and social dares, and some were slightly risque, especially after sundown and several refills. You join Catch the Cup. The music is someone smacking 2 spoons against a sheep's rib cage. The wine is red, warm, and suspiciously gritty. The game moves fast, it stops. You have the cup, and you try to sip without hands, and you miss. You're now wearing half a pint of wine and part of a stranger's potato. The crowd cheers anyway. A woman in a flower crown pats your back and hands you a towel made from what appears to be old pants. "New game," someone shouts. This one involves stacking apples on your head, balancing a jug on your knee, and reciting something that sounds like a legal indictment of pigs. You fail instantly. The punishment? Drink. You oblige. It's mead this time. Honey sweet and almost worth the embarrassment. A boy hands you a parchment. It has a list of challenges. Kiss a duck, chug a quart, compose a love poem to a radish. You ask if this is a real game or someone's fever dream. He shrugs. Yes. By late afternoon, everyone is loudly invested in a game called Stag Chase, which involves teams, antler hats, and running in circles until you collapse, or vomit. The line between winning and losing is unclear. You wisely skip this one and instead join a quiet round of tankard truths, where participants drink and then answer an extremely personal question, usually shouted by a nearby grandmother. "Are you married?" she asks you. "No," you reply. "Would you like to be?" she continues, nodding toward a woman with one eyebrow in excellent posture. You sip slowly and pretend not to understand the question. Here comes your scholarly debate. Were these drinking games merely fun and games, or did they serve a deeper social function? Some historians argue that they helped break down class and gender boundaries. Everyone looked ridiculous after 2 rounds of barrel roll. Others argue that they reinforced roles, especially in public festivals where winners and losers often mirrored local hierarchies. You lean toward the first theory, mostly because the current king of the drinking games is a pig farmer's daughter who's just beaten a knight in a mead-chugging sprint. The sun sets, and the fair doesn't slow down. A bonfire roars, someone plays a fiddle, another someone plays a drum made from a hollowed loaf of bread. You watch as people dance, stumble, laugh, and try to balance tankards on their heads while walking a plank. You're handed one more drink, it's called Last Call. No one knows what's in it. You sip, you regret, immediately, but you also smile. Because in this muddy, messy, ridiculous celebration of inebriated human spirit, you found something deeply ancient and oddly pure. The joy of being very dumb together. You stumble toward a hay bale and lie down, the stars spinning slightly above. You've played the games, you've passed the tests, you've made a cheese-based fool of yourself. And somehow, you've never felt more at home. You wake on a pile of straw outside a tavern you don't remember entering, your clothes stiff with ale, mud, and something vaguely animal. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, a cart creaks, and someone is quietly sobbing over spilled beer. You sit up slowly, realizing the sun is blinding, the wind is cold, and your stomach is staging a small rebellion. Somehow, this is your life now. Welcome to the medieval inn circuit. The tavern is a low-slung building of timber and wattle, smoke curling from a crooked chimney, a sign that depicts a mug of ale clutched by a man who may have lost a finger. You enter cautiously, stepping over puddles, puddings, and whatever that smell is in the corner. Inside, the tavern is chaos refined. Tables crowded, mugs clanking, a lute screeching somewhere in the back, and a woman yelling at a cat perched on a barrel for stealing a loaf of bread. A barkeep with a face like charred bread greets you, not with words, but with a tankard. You take it, and it smells like barley, vinegar, and faintly survival. You drink. It burns. It's good. You're reminded why humans drink alcohol. It makes the world tolerable, even when covered in mud and bad decisions. Here's your historical fact. Medieval inns and taverns were essential social hubs. They provided shelter, food, ale, and community. Water was often unsafe, especially in towns, so ale, even weak ale, was safer to drink than the river. Inns offered small beers to children, strong ales to labourers, and occasionally something a little more dangerous for travellers willing to risk the hangover. Hygiene standards were optimistic at best. Shared cups, unwashed tankards, and overcrowded rooms were standard. You sit at a corner table observing the regulars. A man with one sleeve missing tells a story about the night a goose almost won the village fair. A woman balances a tray of pies while drinking from a wooden cup herself. Someone taps a jug to make a rhythm. The air smells like sweat, smoke, ale, and bread, a combination that somehow feels comforting. You drink again. The innkeeper leans toward you. Want something stronger? He asks. The local brew. It'll put hair on your chest. You nod. He fills a cup with a dark liquid, thick and syrupy, with a faint herbal tang. It's potent, clearly. You sip cautiously. It's sweet at first, then bitter, then alarming. But somehow it works. Your muscles loosen, your headache dulls, your mind seems just a little sharper, even though your judgment screams, "Don't do this again!" Here's your fringe fact. Some medieval tavern ales were fortified with herbs, honey, or even spices like ginger and cinnamon, partially to improve flavour and partially to extend shelf life. Others contained secret ingredients, juniper, wormwood, or low doses of psychoactive plants to mask spoiled batches, or, in rare cases, give patrons a special experience. Some recipes were carefully guarded by innkeepers, passed down for generations. Some were just lucky guesses. You do not know which this one is. A scholar might debate whether medieval inn brews were truly medicinal, or just a convenient excuse to get drunk and socialise. Records show that ale was prescribed for everything from mild colds to digestive issues, though effectiveness varied widely. Many historians now believe that in towns where clean water was scarce, ale functioned as both nutrition and social lubricant. In other words, it worked. You notice a group playing a game involving mugs, dice, and loud insults. Someone rolls a 6 and spills their drink. Another rolls a 1 and must kiss the nearest pie. You watch, fascinated. Eventually someone notices you and insists you join. You hesitate, then take a mug, pretending you know what you're doing. You drink, you lose, you drink again. Laughter surrounds you. A pie is almost lost. You do not care. By nightfall, the tavern is overflowing with drinkers, sleepers, and one remarkably ambitious cat. You've drunk 3 different types of ale, a spiced cider, and whatever the innkeeper's special was. Your hands smell like hops and wood smoke. Your tunic is sticky in a way that cannot be washed, and yet you feel oddly alive. You step outside for a moment, breathing in the night air. Stars glint faintly through clouds. Somewhere down the road, a dog howls. From the tavern, you hear laughter, shouting, and the low, contented burp of a man who's clearly won at something. You sip the last of your mug, the liquid warm in your hands, and realise that, for all the mud, the questionable hygiene and the chaos, this is exactly what life feels like in the Middle Ages. Unpredictable, messy, and occasionally brilliant. You lie back against a wall of the inn and let the sounds wash over you, tasting ale on your tongue, warmth in your chest, and the strange, comforting notion that humanity has always found ways to drink together, laugh together, and survive together, regardless of hygiene or law. The morning air hits you like a wet rope. Mud squelches underfoot. Your tunic smells faintly of last night's inn, and yet, somehow, your head feels only mildly betrayed by yesterday's ale. You stretch, blink at the rising sun, and realise you've arrived at yet another village fair. The kind that promises fun, chaos, and, inevitably, drinking contests designed to test both your body and your soul. You pause at the entrance, where a man in a straw hat waves a wooden ladle like a conductor's baton. "You there," he calls. "Contestants for the barrel race, mead chugging, pie balancing, do you have the courage?" You hesitate, then nod. Naturally. Courage is just another word for stupidity when it comes to medieval drinking. Inside the square, tables are stacked high with wooden mugs, barrels, and a variety of pies. Meat, cheese, apple, and one suspiciously blackened thing that might be a pudding or might be someone's childhood regret. The crowd cheers as participants line up. You notice that many of them are already drunk. One man wears a turkey on his head. Another balances a jug of honeymead in each hand while hopping on one foot. You wonder how many of these people will survive the day. Here's your historical fact. Medieval festival drinking contests were surprisingly common. They were often tied to religious feasts, harvest celebrations, or civic holidays. Rules varied, but competitions could involve chugging ale, balancing mugs while running, or drinking from enormous communal bowls. Some contests were serious. Winners received barrels of ale, coins, or the right to lead the next year's procession. Others were chaos incarnate, with little more than laughter, bruises, and spillage as prizes. The first contest begins, the barrel race. You must roll a barrel across the muddy square while taking sips from a mug at each checkpoint. Naturally, you underestimate how slippery the barrel is. You roll it straight into a pile of hay. A goat steps on it. The crowd cheers. You drink as punishment. You stagger upright, catch the barrel again, and somehow, miraculously, finish the race. You've won something. Probably a mild concussion. Next up, the pie balancing challenge. A wooden spoon is your weapon, a meat pie your payload, and your balance is your pride. You wobble, stumble, and nearly pitch the pie into the face of a small child who is laughing hysterically. Somehow, through sheer luck and determination fueled by residual mead, you cross the finish line. The pie is a little squished. Your tunic is far worse. The crowd applauds anyway. Here's your fringe fact. Some medieval festival contests were dangerously elaborate. In England, contests occasionally involved climbing greased poles, riding slippery horses while holding mugs of ale, or attempting to eat a pie while blindfolded, all while maintaining composure and avoiding injury. Injuries were common, and sometimes the loser's punishment involved a dunking in a river or an enforced drinking session, which could be far worse than losing. You stagger to the chugging table where 2 jugs of honeymead are waiting. The rules are simple. Drink both as fast as possible without vomiting. Simple in theory, catastrophic in practice. You attempt the first jug. It burns your throat, floods your stomach, and somehow still tastes like sunshine. The second jug goes down with grim determination, leaving you wobbling like a newborn foal. The crowd cheers, vaguely impressed, vaguely concerned. You lean on a nearby fence post for support, realizing that stamina in medieval drinking contests was just another form of survival skill. A man with a painted face challenges you to the final event, the last laugh. It involves spinning 3 times, taking a sip from a mug on the ground, reciting a nursery rhyme backward, and then hopping across 3 barrels while singing the village anthem. You accept. regret begins immediately. The first spin makes you dizzy enough to see double. The second sip is aggressively foul. You stumble across the barrels, sloshing your mug with every step. The rhyme emerges as something unrecognisable but strangely poetic. You fall into the mud on the final barrel, a perfect, graceless crash. The crowd goes wild. Someone tosses a pie in your direction. You catch it in your lap. Victory is yours. Here's your scholarly debate. Were medieval drinking contests merely entertainment, or did they serve a deeper social purpose? Some historians argue they reinforced community bonds, tested endurance, and subtly taught limits. Others insist they were exercises in chaos, designed purely to produce spectacle, laughter, and occasional hospital visits. You lean toward the latter, your clothes saturated in ale and pie, your limbs trembling, your brain buzzing with triumph and horror in equal measure. As evening falls, the festival winds down. You're seated on a bench with a slice of cold pie in one hand and a half-empty mug in the other. The sun sets in muddy amber and violet, casting long shadows across the square. Children scamper through puddles. Musicians play off-key flutes and drums. Someone begins a song about a rooster who saved the village from a cheese shortage. You take a slow sip, savouring warmth, exhaustion, and the faint scent of burned pastry. For a moment you feel something resembling peace. Chaos can wait. Ale can wait. And tomorrow, you think vaguely, you might even sleep through the morning without spilling something. But only vaguely. You lie back in the straw, the world spinning gently around you, pie crumbs stuck to your tunic, mug half empty, mind buzzing with every absurd, sticky, glorious decision you've made since this journey began. And yet, somehow, it all makes sense in the muddy, laughing Ale Street universe of medieval festival life. The next morning dawns crisp and golden, with frost glittering on the rooftops and your head vaguely threatening mutiny. You haul yourself upright, still sticky with festival remnants, and follow the smell of roasting meat and warm bread toward the next village. Today is special. A wedding feast. A grand, city hall-sized affair where ale flows as freely as the gossip, and everyone from the local lord to the street sweeper gathers to drink, dance, and demonstrate that social hierarchies only matter when someone spilled a tankard on a noble's toes. You slide into the hall, greeted by a chorus of laughter, clinking mugs, and a harp that somehow sounds like it's weeping. Tables are laden with food and barrels of ale, wine, and something suspiciously labelled elderberry elixir. You're handed a mug immediately, no questions asked. The bride and groom sit at a raised table surrounded by relatives, friends, and a man in a jester's outfit who appears to be simultaneously juggling pies and insulting everyone politely. You take a sip. Warm, malty, and dangerously smooth. Here's your historical fact. Weddings and large civic feasts in medieval Europe often featured copious amounts of alcohol, not just as entertainment, but as part of social obligation. Drinking was a way to honour guests, seal alliances, and demonstrate generosity. Ale, wine, mead, and spiced cordials were considered essential. Guests who refused a toast might risk social embarrassment, or worse, a comment from a judge, guild official, or snarky cousin who kept track of etiquette with frightening precision. The hall is alive with games and challenges. Guests balance cups on their heads, race across the room carrying jugs, and perform increasingly ridiculous feats, while the crowd cheers or groans. You join a team in a game called Dance and Drink, which involves spinning, hopping, and occasionally tossing a cup to another participant without spilling. You fail immediately, sending ale across the floor and into someone's lap, but the crowd laughs instead of scolding. Someone throws a pie at your head as punishment, or maybe as encouragement. You're not sure. You catch it, eat it, and cheer anyway. Here's your fringe fact. In some medieval cities, formal feasts were accompanied by rules called sumptuary laws, which dictated what could be eaten and drunk according to rank. However, enforcement was often inconsistent, and many guests found creative ways to drink or eat what they pleased. In one English town, there are records of a lord publicly pouring wine on the floor because the sumptuary law forbade him from drinking common ale, and the crowd applauded. Chaos was part of the tradition. By mid-afternoon, the feast turns to storytelling and toasts. A bard recounts heroic exploits of knights and fools, each tale punctuated with mugs of ale and shouts of "Hear, hear!" You notice the bride sipping quietly, laughing at some particularly absurd story about a monk, a goat, and a barrel of honey. It strikes you that alcohol in every form is the lubricant of memory and society here. Without it, you'd be watching nobles politely chew on stale bread while the spirit of celebration was trapped behind velvet curtains. A minor scandal erupts when someone challenges the local magistrate to a drinking duel over a dispute about who sang the wedding anthem better. Cups clatter. The duel ends with both participants spilling ale, losing their hats and shaking hands, much to the delight of the onlookers. You sip from your mug, realizing that medieval drinking culture was as much about negotiating social hierarchy as it was about intoxication. To drink was to participate, to celebrate, and occasionally to survive politically. Here's your scholarly debate for the day. Did public drinking reinforce social bonds or expose underlying tensions? Historians suggest both. Ale and wine offered a means to temporarily flatten hierarchies, foster communication, and display generosity. But too much drinking could lead to brawls, legal disputes, and even reputational damage. You've seen both today, and in your mud-streaked, ale-stained state, you find the balance fascinating and terrifying. As evening approaches, the bride and groom lead a dance around the hall, guests following in a jumble of feet, spilled drinks, and laughter. You stumble behind, part of the procession, part of the chaos. You've drunk, danced, spun, and tasted more ale than most people see in a lifetime. Your tunic is sticky, your boots are mud-caked, and your mind is a foggy scrapbook of sights, sounds, smells, and slightly terrifying hallucinations. You finish the last of your mug, set it down on a bench, and stare at the candles flickering in the evening light. For weeks, maybe months, you've been moving through medieval life like a curious ghost, tasting, stumbling, observing, and surviving. Taverns, monasteries, guild halls, festivals, fairs, and feasts each offered lessons in patience, creativity, community, and chaos. Alcohol was the thread that tied it all together, a lubricant, a social instrument, a spiritual experience, and sometimes a mild poison. You lie back against the wall, exhausted, content, and faintly sticky. The hall buzzes around you, a living organism of voices, mugs, and laughter. Somewhere a dog barks. Someone spills wine. A pie rolls across the floor. You close your eyes and think about the monks, the guilds, the alewives, the festival goers, the roosters, and the countless cups you've drunk. And you realise something. You've survived the medieval world of getting wasted, more or less intact, and it has been glorious, absurd, and profoundly human. The night is quiet now. The candles burn low, the laughter has faded to occasional burps and murmurs, and you lie on a straw-strewn bench, the hall around you settling into a soft hum of contented exhaustion. You think about the journey you've had, from fairs where goats judged you, to guild halls where apprentices debated hops and herbs, to monasteries where monks brewed beer like priests brewed miracles. Every mug, every spill, every hallucination, every toast has been a lesson in chaos, community, and the strange sticky joy of human indulgence. You remember the brawls, the pies, the pig bladders, the drunken lances, and even the rogue rats and cats who were, without doubt, more skilled drinkers than you ever were. What strikes you now lying here is the way alcohol threaded itself into medieval life, not as an escape, but as a binding force. Ale and wine were fuel for labourers, ritual for monks, entertainment for nobles, and connection for everyone in between. It was messy, inconsistent, and occasionally horrifying, but also profoundly human. You've seen people sober and drunk, powerful and powerless, laughing and crying, all brought together by the simple act of pouring liquid into a mug, raising it to lips and sharing a moment. You realise that, in a way, drinking wasn't just about the alcohol. It was about surviving a world built from mud, superstition, and unpredictability with a smile, a cheer, and maybe a pie in your face. As the final embers of the hearth glow, you drift towards sleep, the smells, sounds, and tastes of the Middle Ages still vivid in your mind. You think of the monks, the guilds, the fairs, the festivals, and the countless strangers who made a cup of ale feel like both a lifeline and a story. You're tired, yes, achy, sticky, and slightly worried about your liver. But you're also strangely content, filled with a sense of connection to a world long past yet endlessly alive through its chaos, its joy, and its remarkably resilient human spirit. And with that, your medieval journey of getting wasted and surviving comes to its quiet, warm, and oddly satisfying end.